Okay, so I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Abstentions?
Aye.
One. Thank you very much. 6-0-1. Okay, minutes of August 7th.
Okay, I've got corrections, but I'll move approval.
Okay.
Is there a second for that? Second.
Okay.
On the first page, it just, language again. I'd leave out the words "and she." Chelmsford resident, member of the FinCom, is an accountant and is it here.
Okay.
I would leave that out, the is and she. And then on the next page, I think there's the bottom of the second paragraph, there's an if that I think should be an is.
And recognizing, yes.
That's all.
Actually, last page, my should be by.
I'm sorry.
My should be by.
Oh,
Okay, so with those three amendments, I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
aye.
6-0. I'm sorry, 7-0. And finally, August 14th.
I'll move approval of the minutes of August 14th with the following correction. On the top of the second page, the first sentence, it should be a they rather than a hey.
Yes.
They stepped it down the same way.
Sorry, who was the second on that?
Me.
that
Was.
Helen?
I'm sorry, didn't know there was one.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor with that amendment, please signify. Aye.
Aye.
Okay. So far, so good. All right, discussion of the final report. This will be a little bit of back and forth. Yes, I sent out a couple of new sections late today, 5:30. Take a look at those. As we go through, we're gonna have to develop a plan for what we're doing over the next week or two. If people are, feel like it's something we can do, I'm comfortable with doing all of the editing via email. When that happens, document control becomes kind of an issue. So just try to, every time you send out something amended, try to add something to the title so that we can tell exactly which version of the document we're talking about. A couple of other sections went out earlier. John and I both circulated versions of a small commercial exemption and a residential exemption, I think. Mary, you have comments on those?
My brutal editing.
Yes, your brutal editing. Do you want to just? I think not everyone again has a copy of that, but do you want to just kind of walk through and talk in general about what you were seeing and?
Well, okay, the one on, the main one is, because I had more questions than anything on the one that you did on small commercial. Just, I got to the point where I don't even understand this. First thing I did under residential, that what you had as the first paragraph seemed to me belonged sort of within the body, so I moved it
Okay.
basically from there to there.
Okay.
It's, all the stuff is there, and
Yeah, so I think edits like that, that's the sort of thing, it's probably a matter of taste more than anything else, and if people want to do that, I'm perfectly happy with that. That's the sort of thing I think is easily resolved at the end. We'll just take a
Yeah,
vote
that's fine.
on, you know, whatever style people like.
I can send my version out.
Yeah, I think, let's do that. I'll ask you to do that, and again, if other people wanna take a stab at rearranging things, I think that's all well and good.
I mean, it
You
just,
had some more kind of substantial changes, though, in terms of what should be there and what
yeah,
shouldn't.
what was this comment? Oh, okay, you had something about, what did I do with it? In the conditions, do you have that in your document? You say something about property must be a principal residence. Anyway, there was a clause that said, as used by the taxpayer for state income tax purposes.
Right.
Is that clause, what does that mean in the context of
Well,
defining?
I'll have Frank check me here, but really, that's the ultimate definition of whether or not it's your residence. Yeah. And so that, a lot of that, yeah, some of that stuff is very kind of legalistic and boilerplate sort of language, and that's because it came from either MGL or a DOR gloss on MGL.
It's not sufficient to say it's the principal residence is your place of residence as of January 1st, period. You need this clause that says is used by taxpayer for state income tax purposes.
When pressed on the matter, that's what we've been told to go with.
Okay. I guess part of my feeling about who is this document intended for?
I think that's a good question.
It's intended, I think, well, for the selectmen, but also for the guy interested to read. So it should be, so in my view, it needs to be readable and not have too much technical language in where the technical language can be avoided. I mean, there were things, and that's
Yeah,
part of
it
under
gets a
small
little-
commercial exemption that I sat there and said, you know, I've been immersed in this stuff for 2 months and I don't know what this means. So if I don't know what it means after being immersed in it for 2 months, the phraseology going into a report that we want people out there to understand is what I was trying to simplify. Only if that clause is important, I will put it back in, but
Well-
I said, what,
Yeah, I think that's a little bit more than wordsmithing there, what you're
Okay,
talking about. But I think it's a legitimate thing to consider for the entire committee. I will say, I was writing it more with an eye to preparing the selectmen for a tax policy debate. But we have talked about, and I think you're right, that one of the functions that I hope this document fulfills going forward is not just to prepare 5 people, but to prepare anybody who wants to take an interest in it. And yeah, if the weeds get a little too tall, then that might interfere with it helping. So again, if people have a feeling one way or another, if you want to just start striking through stuff, I think what you've done is good, keeping the notes there, so that you can see what the original is.
yeah.
The only thing I'd say is, try to leave some kind of trail behind, so that we can
Let's
see
just
what the changes that you're intending are.
This is just the track changes
Right.
feature in
Right.
Word that I was using.
I have a question on that subject.
Yeah.
If there's language that we want in there, and there's also language that we basically should have in there, there might be some people that would like to see that language, and I'm just wondering, maybe we can italicize that language and then have a footnote meaning, in other words, or,
Well, yeah,
I'm not like that, but just a
I
thought.
need to see a specific
Yeah.
place. Anyway, and the other thing that I did, and we've been having this discussion, then you have this little table, and I tended to just say, you gotta delete this table because you can't read it.
Right.
And I tended to do it in the prose with just
Right.
the words. And
I
I
will-
can be outvoted on that. That's
Yeah, no,
that's my way of doing it, but
I agree.
Okay, I kind of feel the
I think
same way that I would.
prose is a better way to do it.
yeah, and on this one, in explaining how you get the residential exemption, on the table, there was just more on the table than what you needed to get there.
Okay.
look at it, Mike, and
No, no,
tell me.
I'll say, I'm happy to be outvoted on something like that too,
Okay.
but my bias is kind of the other direction.
I hear you.
I kind of prefer spreadsheet to prose, and even more than that, I'd rather have it in there twice than just once. But again,
I don't think
this is
there's
a-
anything in the table that shows you really how you get to
no,
it, whereas.
no, you would have to,
The prose
you would
shows you
have
how
to
to get
sit
there.
and try to do the calculations yourself and convince yourself that you're getting the same numbers.
Yeah.
I agree with that. It is hard to demonstrate an actual calculation in most of these cases.
This is just a little thing. Do people out here generally use the term mill rate, except for Mike?
I flagged that one too.
Okay.
I don't, we talk about tax rates. We don't, I mean,
Okay.
I know mill rate or something and
Academic term.
it's, yeah, and I just.
Well, okay, I can go through and change.
No, I-
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
not-
No, past aspersions are,
It's interesting, though, it struck me in one place, you talked about the rate, and then in the next sentence, you talked about it as the mill rate.
Well-
And it's gotta be one or the other. I mean, you gotta be consistent.
Actually, one of the things I have also done is just used it to vary it a little bit so that you're not saying tax rate every other sentence,
Rate.
just for a little bit of variety.
I had the
But
rate.
yeah, I don't mind going back and changing all of those all of those to tax rates and again, if it becomes repetitive, then maybe we'll do a little bit more wordsmithing there.
I noticed then you had a section net effects of residential exemption, and in one portion, you're talking about a 10%, and then I think you wanted this to be 10%.
That 15 was a misprint. I took it from John's original.
Okay, yeah, that's what I figured,
Verbiage,
so.
but when he wrote it up, he used the
Used 15.
15%. I switched it to 10, mostly so I could make the calculations a little bit easier to
Yeah.
understand, so you could see 10%.
Okay, what else did I have? Okay, after your second table, you have a sentence. Assessed values and unit counts were collected for this is where you show how a residential exemption, if you did it for residents, how it affected those people that didn't qualify for it.
Yeah.
Okay. And it says assessed values and unit counts were collected for a non-random collection of 16 rental properties, representing a wide variety of assessed values and residence styles. And effects on a subset are summarized, and effects on a subset, similar valued properties have been removed, are summarized in the table before. And I got lost at that whole
Okay.
clause.
I think that's an unfortunate consequence of filtering John through me.
Okay,
We started out with the table that he put together.
Right.
I tried to just remove a couple of lines. There were a couple of very similarly priced
Okay.
units, like 400,000 and eight units. One was 400,000, one was 460,000 or something, and the numbers pretty much work the same way. Rather than having them duplicated, I just took them out. But we can rewrite it just to say that we looked at 12 non-random units.
But again, we had the issue of prose versus a table. Because my version didn't even have a table. It just had the prose.
okay,
I
I looked
like
mainly
tables.
at Mike's first. And anyway,
We can.
I
Tables are
didn't-
great
didn't
with
know
a
what-
small explanation to the table. You don't need to
I-
regurgitate everything.
I understand. I didn't know what this was telling me. I didn't know what effects it was talking about. The comment I made was, I don't understand this part of the sentence. What
Yeah.
effects are you talking about? It needs to be,
Redone.
you
Okay,
need,
that's
I
fine.
don't, not necessarily redone, but it needs to be looked at. I don't know whether it needs to be there at all, or it needs a better explanation, is all that, okay.
Well, I think the important thing that I think John was trying to say, and that I wanted to keep, was that these are not kind of randomly selected units, right? That they're chosen, maybe not with intent in mind, but
Less random.
there's no reason to
Whatever
think
that
that they're some kind of a global or a representation of the global rental universe.
Which is one of two reasons why I had for not including the table. The non-randomness of it, it's not intended to be a representative sample. And the second is that I'm concerned about sensitivity of the data, because people could reverse this and figure out which properties they are, and these people may not want this information public.
Good point.
That's
John,
fast.
what's meant by this clause, effects on a subset are
I think that's me.
I think that's simple.
okay,
The
I'll let him worry about it.
subset was that I didn't use all of the numbers.
Okay,
I don't know, that would be, I think would be a little tricky to work backwards. I mean,
You have the assessed values there. It's
Yeah.
pretty easy to look up the assessed values, and people know how many units different housing projects have.
It's on the town website,
what is?
assessed value.
yeah.
You
Where I
need
got
to-
It's public information.
For
Public
GIS, yeah,
information.
GIS, but you need to
It's
plug
public
in,
information,
you can't
so I don't know why
plug
it's
in
a
the assessed
concern.
value and get a list of properties. You have to plug in
You
a
don't have to go
property.
look at every one,
Yeah.
Right.
If you're gonna search for it and it's public information, so
Yep.
be it.
but it's all there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not, can't see it.
You're not providing private information, bottom line. It's
But if-
public information.
That's right.
But if you're
Public
looking at,
information, but it still
Yes.
could be sensitive to people.
Declassified or all.
if anybody could have a problem with it, then stay away from it.
Yeah,
Well,
right.
is there, so I guess, is there a way to show that information in a non-tabular form? I mean, can we?
Yeah, the way I did it.
Are we, is it enough to say that the monthly rate change ranges between 9 and
Min-max,
60?
min-max average.
I don't, yeah, see, I didn't like the average there because you're comparing really different things.
Close enough, though.
Let me tell you what I did.
Sure.
I took John's residential exemption and yours, and I looked at both of them. I've always liked simplicity. John's is very simple. I understood it. It wasn't too wordy, it wasn't too complicated. For an economics professor, my. But anyway. I didn't like, you went from 10 to 15. I like the simple 15% calculation.
As opposed to a 10% calculation?
Well, you did both.
No, he didn't. Where he had 15, that was
That's a typo.
it should have said 10. Because I checked the table, I
I
checked the
didn't check
table to see
the
what,
arithmetic.
yeah, I did.
But I just like how simple it was.
Okay.
And no reflection on you.
No, it's
You-
fine.
You certainly did a lot more than I did,
Well,
but this is what I do best, is criticize.
Right. Uh-huh.
I'll send you my copy too.
Well, I think that's where we are.
Yeah.
And that's what I believed when I started getting all these emails. That if we get 6 of these,
Yeah.
then we got a real mess. Because how do you,
Yeah, how do you put them all
I mean,
together?
I've been spoiled. The last committee I sat on was chaired by
yeah.
Sam Chase. He kept excruciating detail, enormous information. And I mean, when we got to the end of the charter, we were effectively done and had gone through every word, not just every sentence.
Well,
And if we'd had 5 or 10 different ways to look at it, we'd have never finished. And I think that's really my point. The other thing I get concerned about is when you start, everybody's sending emails to everybody. You only have one that wants to debate with somebody, and you're violating the open meeting law. And I'm fussy, as you know. Because you can't debate it unless you're only one of two of you debating with one or two. But if you get a majority, you got a problem. And the ramifications,
Well-
net ramifications are zero. Because we're not going to be doing something that we're not going to have discussed in open
Right.
session.
Right.
And vote on it.
Can I make a comment? I'm hearing a lot of minutia here, a lot of wordsmithing. If I were king, if I were you, Mike, my prerogative would be, let's conceptually agree on where we want to go in terms of subject matter for each of our bulleted items. And then from there, we can wordsmith and drill down a little further. We don't need to drill down today, I don't think. I think that's really for the next meeting, unless I'm missing the itinerary here. I think we need to get on paper in concept where we want to go. And talking about this meaning that or whatever, I think if we're getting the general discussion and thoughts on paper, let's start there. And then we can all read and wordsmith for the next meeting. And then perhaps all this debate will come out in the next meeting, not,
But my feeling is, at least on a couple of the subjects, that's what Mike has sent out, is sort of the general, what you're talking about, and what's left on those sections is the wordsmithing.
all right, I don't know why, I think we need to just think bigger picture tonight, that's all. That's my comment, my observation.
Well, this is the big picture.
Right, and I'm not seeing us following in that big picture right now.
That's right.
So let's start with item one, go through the list and go from there. We've all provided input.
Okay. All right, well, if, that actually brings us to the SWOT analysis. So,
Starting at the beginning.
yeah,
We need someone, and the amount of writing is taking a lot. We need somebody to do section one, the introduction. I mean, is Mike supposed to write everything, or are we going to bring pieces in to be put together? I guess that's what I sort of thought.
But the
we
last
were-
meeting we had, we were talking about everybody doing a piece.
Well, that's what I mean, and there've been maybe three of us that have done pieces, and I'm saying we need somebody to say, I will do that number one.
well, yeah, I think when we leave here tonight, yeah, we need to have some assignments. I think it is helpful to have some understanding of what the committee as a whole would prefer in terms of style and format. That's fine. We are gonna need some lists. Do you wanna, well, let me ask then, do you wanna go through this piece by piece? Do you wanna try to do a SWOT analysis of the topics and leave the introduction and conclusion for last?
I like that idea. Let's focus on the issues at hand and we can fill in the blanks afterwards. It's usually how you write a story.
I think if we take care of the meat, yeah, or if we do the meat, the sandwich will take care of itself. All right. So John sent out, or sent me, I guess, a handy guideline to SWOT exercises from NEMCOG. It's essentially a brainstorming exercise. We'll go around, we'll say what we think. You want to build off of what other people have to say, not attack it or break it down. And then we'll see where we wind up on each of these things. Evan's not here. He had sent in some thoughts on some of the topics himself, so I'll throw those in as we come to the topics. Recommendations are you take each of the categories in order: strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. The strengths and weaknesses are understood as kind of the outcome of current conditions or current events, and opportunities and threats focus more on the situation in the future. So I think what we'll do is start with, well, let's start with the assessing process, item 2, and see if anybody thinks there's something in that, either to strengths or weaknesses to our current understanding of the assessing process or how it's done in Chelmsford. I'm not sure it necessarily lends itself to that sort of an analysis, but if somebody has thoughts.
I think it has a lot of strengths. I personally don't see the weaknesses.
We have a strong assessing department. Move on.
Okay, I guess I would add to that, to just kind of build a little bit, is that not only do we have a strong assessing department, it's backed up by the state
Yep.
review, and there's some external validation of the work that they do as well.
Could some of the opportunities be that they would be able to get more information from the businesses at a sooner length of time, so that they can assess, have more time to assess the commercial? Would that be an
Have
opportunity?
more time on your watch, Frank?
You had mentioned getting more information from the business community. One of the things we look, as you're aware, we send out the income and expense each and every year. And what the DOR continually wants to see from all communities is this higher level compliance to that as possible. We get about a 53 or 55% compliance rate, which is, I consider that pretty good. But they're always asking for more. So we are looking at opportunities to try and increase that compliance rate. And one very recent what we're looking at is making these forms available on the website. So a prospective business could come in, or a property owner, fill out the form and submit it to me without ever having to get involved with filling it out by hand and all of that. So we're going to look at that over the next year or two. First, send out a survey to kind of gauge the interest in it, and see, if the interest is high, then we'll move forward with it. So, and there are other items too that we would be putting on there for the same reason, to try and increase compliance.
So does that hinder the process if they don't think that it's a good idea?
It wouldn't hinder the process. I would not move forward with the particular software that I'm looking to purchase. But if I get a return that says 75% of them would absolutely respond favorably to this and would use the portal, then I would more than likely move forward. But if 35%, I get a 35% and a 65 saying I'm not interested at all, then I would probably just not purchase it. So the goal is always to try and get the compliance rate up, and the DOR does mention that, and often we'll hand that out as a directive to assessors. Do what you can, seek out other opportunities to get your higher compliance rate, particularly on the income and expense stuff.
So I'd like to ask you a question. Do you see any weaknesses from the policies that come down from the state in relation to your assessing and your needs for the data that you need to receive?
No, I really don't. And the DOR has undergone a number of changes over the last handful of years in terms of leadership. And they're very progressive in terms of looking at other ways to overhaul some of their policies to make it more streamlined, to get rid of antiquated policies. And we hold educational seminars. A county that I belong to, a municipal county I belong to, we hold seminars. We're going to pull in the state to review some of these things.
Great.
So it's kind of an ongoing process, ever evolving.
So
Threats?
there don't seem to be any weaknesses.
A threat would be a change in staff. Frank's done a great job. If Frank's not around, I'd be concerned.
appreciate that.
I do agree with that.
Through a grant.
Any other thoughts on the assessing process?
So are we gonna list as an opportunity for assessment, of the ability to increase the compliance rate? Is that a?
Yeah, I think
We
that
noted.
there's an opportunity
Yeah,
there,
yeah,
sure, right? We
yeah,
can,
absolutely, yeah.
more information is good, is good. All right, the split rate. This maybe doesn't fit the format quite right because it's a hypothetical at this point. What we have is single rate.
I guess I thought what this exercise would do is to give the strengths, weaknesses, et cetera, of doing this. I mean, we're.
Of employee.
Of each subject, of each
Yeah.
numeric subject, we should
Yeah.
be talking about.
Well, should we,
I'm,
can we just assume that all of the strengths of a split rate are weaknesses of a single rate and vice versa?
No.
Or so maybe we should break it out. Let's start with the single rate first.
I gotta
Right,
tell
even
you,
though-
I'm not even sure a SWOT analysis is appropriate for this subject matter. It really is just a
Because-
matter of
yeah,
what's positive, what's negative.
yeah.
It's not a SWOT analysis. I struggle with that. I'll buy into the system, what you guys want, but SWOT analysis is for business. It's not for this, in my opinion.
You don't think it's a way to talk about what?
I think, no,
is-
talking about it, fine, but you're not gonna find strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats in each one of these subject matters that we're talking about, because you're right, they're hypothetical in nature. Some of them are factual, and I think it's just a matter of if we do, if we don't, what's the benefit, what's the consequence?
I think, my feeling was like what Westford did and what the stuff we got from them, the pros and the cons
Yeah,
of this
pros and
particular,
cons,
pros and
simple as that, keep it
cons.
simple, silly. That's all it is. This SWOT analysis is too
Okay.
technical for,
You like Westford's?
The report that they put together, they had a.
Like that?
I thought where they showed pros and cons was a good concept, yeah.
that's all you need.
Okay.
I like the layout, I might not like the words.
I like the layout. I didn't like anything else that was in there. I
You
thought
didn't like
some
what?
of it was like,
Wait, I'm
are you
sorry,
really
Helen.
putting this on
Context.
paper?
I like the context.
Well, we don't have to write it the way they did, but at the
No.
end of the day, we can say, this is what's good about doing this is what's bad about doing it. It's that
And,
simple.
and that's what I thought,
I agree.
we were sort of in
You know-
agreement, we were going to come out with at the end, not make a recommendation, but
Yep,
tell them
that's-
what the advantages were of doing it, or
If
the
you do this, you get
disadvantages.
this, if you do that,
Right.
you get that. Yeah.
Keep it simple,
Okay.
silly.
All right, so the SWOT analysis is ended.
SWOT analysis
We
is
are
great
replacing
for-
it on the fly with a pro and con analysis.
Sorry I didn't speak up at last meeting, but it
No,
seemed like
you know
everybody
what?
was going for that.
That's
and
okay.
I get SWOT analysis. I love
Right,
SWOT
no,
analysis.
And I understand what you're saying. The fact that it's a hypothetical, we are kind of forcing it into a role that maybe.
SWOT
it doesn't
analysis
have.
would be good for the Economic Development Committee, those kind of things. What, how do we create our mission going forward? Let's do a SWOT analysis.
Okay, well then, let's just start working our way
You
through.
know,
And with that being said, the email that I sent to you all today is based on a SWOT analysis.
Right.
And quite frankly, I had only one way of thinking, so.
Luckily, you're here to,
I
Redirect.
thought some of them were if you were doing the pros and cons, the threat was more of a con,
Yeah, no, and I tried to be politically correct in my prose, so.
okay. Well, let's start with pros of a split rate. I will give you, so Evan, and again, he bought in, so he's describing it as a strength, provides incremental tax savings to residents.
Could you say that again?
He said, provides incremental tax savings to residents.
I would like to add, in the short run.
See, I would have said one time.
Why short run?
right, yeah,
Because in the
right.
long run, what's gonna happen, we can talk about that later when we start discussing my comments, but things change in the long term. But in the short run, yes, and one time, yes, but in the long term,
Fair.
valuation on the commercial side declines, and it shifts back to the resident.
That's
a
not, that's not a given at all. It's not a given at all. We've
You
seen
know what?
plenty of evidence that it doesn't happen.
Well, we'll talk about that, I guess.
Well, so that.
All else is equal,
There
John.
may be,
But all
again,
else isn't equal. It
Oh,
never is.
okay, but
It
only in
never
your
is.
circumstances.
No, I'm always consistent on that.
Yeah. No.
Well, again, do we think it's a one-time saving?
No.
I don't
This
think it's
kind of-
one time. I
this
think it's
kind
a
of
short-run solution to a long-term problem. It's not one time, because there's gonna be additional times where it's gonna benefit the
Every
residents.
year,
I'm not
right?
gonna hide that.
You're gonna have a large number of residents if it goes that way, look at, I saved $200 this year. Next year, where's my $200? They're not gonna understand.
And
Oh,
that
I-
point is well
Started out.
taken. Nancy is, I'm sorry.
I disagree
Hi,
with you.
Mary.
Mary,
Because I've
Mary is
talked to
pointing that
people.
out, but in reality, the math is there to show this.
I understand the math.
But
And I
that's what we're talking about.
Reality
facts,
is they won't.
Yes, they will, because
Oh, really?
yes, because I've
I
talked-
don't think so.
I do think so. I do think that
It
they see
declines
more.
over time, though.
It might. I
Actually, the
don't-
savings increase over time.
That's not true.
Actually, the numbers show they do.
I just really think
Sure they do.
that the typical taxpayer is gonna get a tax bill and gonna say, how does it compare with what I paid last year?
Yep.
And so that first year you get the decline.
Get the decline.
The next year, your bill is gonna go up, and nobody's gonna compare and say, oh, you know, but compared to if they had done the single
I'm on your
rate,
side, Mary.
Yeah, I know
Trust
you
me,
are.
I'm on your
If-
side.
My
Things we-
base
One of the things
is
that we
there.
agreed to all along is that we're supposed to educate people.
And I disagree. I'm sorry.
No, please. How I like you now.
Thank you. But the funny part about it is, in our little group of where I talk, they have gone down 1 year, last year, and then they went up. And the community has talked about the difference and the fact that we did save the first year, but it's also helped us the second year. Now, why it went down, we don't have any idea, and I didn't understand it, but it was fine. So I don't think, Mary, that as many people think that if it went down 1 year, it has to keep staying at that. They understand taxes go up. They understand, the majority of people do understand that just like your budget, it's the same thing. A town has a budget, your house has a budget. You need more money to run it the following year. They understand that. And where's it
Helen-
gonna come?
I'm not disagreeing with that. My issue is more with John wanting to compare it with a single rate every year. Once you've adopted a split rate, I think people will start to keep looking at it in terms of a split rate. And they're not going to each year say, oh, what would it have been if they had done a single
What I'm
tax
saying
rate?
to you is exactly that.
People don't even know. We've only had single
It
rate in this
doesn't have
town.
to be a single rate. What I'm trying to say to you, and this is what I don't think you're understanding, is that when our taxes in Meadowood fell quite a bit for some reason, the following year they went up,
Yeah.
okay? Nobody understood why they fell or why they went up, and nobody cared. What they did understand was that they had gone down and they had saved. And it was talked about before I even got on this committee, if they hadn't gone down to start with, they would have been paying more the second year because that would have been a greater amount, as he had pointed out. I didn't understand it till he did that chart. But I do think that there are people that understand that. Sorry, I
No,
do.
You're absolutely right.
Just let me summarize the state of play here.
Okay.
So at this point, we've described the tax savings as incremental, one-time, and recurring. So maybe under pros, we need to simplify it to provides tax savings to residents. On the con side, perhaps the best encapsulation of the counter argument is
Savings
that they may not be,
decreases over time.
they may not, well, I was gonna say that the savings may not be perceived as savings
It's
after the
both
first
that.
year.
It's both the savings is not perceived and the savings decrease over time based on the changing valuations on the commercial
The
side.
presumed change in valuations.
John, I'll let you talk about that when it's your due course, okay? You tell me why I should be thinking of it any different and give me some good examples.
The examples of all the communities that have a split
Because
tax rate and
things
that
have
haven't
changed
seen it.
beyond just rates. You're the academic. We're talking all things being equal. All things being equal.
But they aren't.
Okay, Mr. Textbook. Listen, there's a lot of things that can change. We can redo Route 40, we can get 129 going. We can't be thinking of that in terms of what we're looking at right now. We have to talk in some means of, this is what we have, what's it gonna look like going forward? Those are great exogenous changes, or however you wanna look at it, that could benefit us down the road. And yes, that could increase valuation, but the rate itself affects valuation, that's my point.
And that's what you brought out in your
Well-
points today that you
Yep.
sent out.
It's a
So-
simple
But-
mathematical equation. There's nothing different.
Well,
I
yeah.
don't understand simple.
Yeah,
I,
but
I
I'm-
don't understand math, okay? So bear with me, okay? If the tax rate at a single rate is $10 on 1,000, just hypothetically, okay? Hope I get this out right, especially being on TV. And we do a split tax rate, the selectmen, not we, but the selectmen do a split tax rate. And it goes down to $9, okay? So the person saves whatever they save that first year, right? The second year, their house increases in value, right? But it's still $9. But the value of their house has increased, so it makes their taxes go up. Am I wrong on that?
It's another mathematical equation. It's the levy is divided by the valuation.
So when the value of your house goes up, and you see that the value of my house has gone up on my tax bill,
Yeah.
and then your tax rate goes up the next year, and then the next year it goes up because the value of your house goes up, you can't be so.
In relative terms, if the levy is increasing, your tax is gonna increase.
Right,
Both, on
right.
both commercial and residential.
Right,
No.
right.
I don't think that's quite right. If the levy increases at a faster rate than the overall valuation increases,
But you're gonna
Right,
pay the
it-
levy regardless. You're just splitting the levy up differently every year.
Right, but my question
It's
is.
just the rate
let me-
goes
let
down
me-
or the rate goes
Let me finish what I'm thinking.
Go ahead.
Okay, so it goes up that way. Now, if you're on a single tax rate, okay? And it's $10, and the value of your house is this, you get to the second year, the value of your house goes up, and it's still $10. The net, it's still $10 a thousand, because they haven't they
Go
haven't
ahead, go
increased it. So then you get to the third one, and the value of your house goes up.
The rate changes, the rate or the valuation changes every year.
It does.
Okay, that's where I'm missing the whole thing,
So we have our valuations each and every year, and then we calculate the tax rate. So once again, your valuation is, say, $300,000. To use your example, we have a $9 tax rate. Lo and behold, the next year, we have 8 or 10% market-driven increase. Just market, no new houses necessarily, just to keep it simple.
Right.
Now the value has gone up, now we're looking at $330,000. The levy goes up, the statutory 2.5%. Now we have that levy, as Tom is describing, that's gone up, the values have gone up. We calculate the tax rate, there's always going to be fluctuation in the tax rate. The tax rate could go down theoretically one year to the next. If the valuations went up relatively dramatically, we went up to statutory 2.5%, it's mathematically possible the tax rate could drop.
Okay.
But
okay,
the
wait
levy
a
goes
minute,
up.
wait a minute,
That
wait a
goes
minute.
up, your taxes are going up.
Your taxes are going up, no question
Wait a minute,
about
wait a
it.
minute.
Yep.
So you're taking what you just explained to me,
Yep.
just so I can get this straight, and it goes up 2.5%.
Yes.
All right? If you have if you have a single tax rate, right? Right now,
Forget
right?
about single.
If you have a tax rate, right? But what happens if you end up with a split tax rate and you do the same thing? Would it not go up a little less? That's
On the
where I'm-
residential side, yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's
yep.
so then you would see
That's
it
the
by
whole-
having common sense to know that the value of your house went up, it went up 2.5%.
No,
Don't think in
No.
terms of the value, think in
2.5%.
terms of the levy going up.
2.5% is really, in the context of this discussion, relates to the levy amount. How much we go, whatever that we raised last year, the levy amount is how much we raise in taxes through properties and
Okay.
personal property. That's what
Okay.
we say, that's not really the whole budget, just to muddy the waters, but it's how much we raise in taxes through real estate and personal property. Statutorily, we can go up 2.5% each and every year, which we do. That's a given. The valuations, both residential and commercial, are valued independent of that. They're driven by the market, given all the sales data. They could go up or down 10 or 15% just to exaggerate, but it can go up and down any amount. They're not governed by 2.5% the way the levy is.
Okay. It's getting a little clearer.
Okay.
And I appreciate it. Thank you.
Problem.
Thanks, everybody. I'm sorry. I did get it.
It's the levy that
Okay.
matters at the end of the
Okay.
day. And that's the
Okay.
last topic item in our outline. but
Okay, okay,
At the end of the day, that's what governs what taxes are being paid.
all right.
And then, in terms of splitting it, if we're gonna split the rate, then it's, it's pro rata based on how the rate's split.
And is there actually a control over that levy?
Yeah.
No. The
That's-
2.5%'s it. That's the only
2.5%,
control.
Yeah, I know, but
Unless we
Somewhere
have
in here
an
it said there
override.
was, somewhere in here, I saw that we went up
But it could-
4% at one point. We didn't. I
You
don't know
can
why.
have,
it
you
says
get,
assessed
you
values
get,
of
the,
each
the existing levy can't
owner
increase by
would
more than
change.
2.5%, but you're allowed to add new growth.
If the assessed
in-
values go
Okay, thank you.
And any
then you're
overrides.
dividing, then if the assessed values are going up faster, then you might have a lower tax rate. It's,
Right, if assessed
It-
values go up
it's-
higher, tax rates go down and vice versa.
I
It's a
mean, and
mathematical,
it's the
simple.
way taxes work in Massachusetts as opposed to some other states, and why during the 2008 and that Great Depression, we were continually able to collect the amount of money we needed. Sure, the tax rate was going up because our values were going down, but we were able to collect it, as opposed to places where the tax rate becomes fixed. And when, or to raise it more than a certain, to raise the tax rate more than a certain amount, they have to go to the voters. And why some states during the depression we had 10 years ago, their state incomes went down.
2.5, right? So I
Pardon?
think
Yeah.
that's what saves us maybe
Yeah,
in that
that's,
situation.
it saves us in a sense.
But in
And
a way, it's been a thorn in our side because we go up automatically 2.5% every year. And, exponentially, that tax rate or that levy has gone up a lot over a 10-year period.
but we aren't affected by falling,
We're not highs and lows. It's a smooth increase.
it
what
is. We're not affected by these drops in property values. They'd have to drop one heck of a long way before we would,
Yeah, they'd have to
be
drop a lot.
define, be against the
Before you hit
limits
the
of
ceiling,
property
yeah.
of 2.5.
so are we still on 3A?
Yeah.
We
Sort
kind
of.
of,
Move on
we
to
kind of
3B.
are.
Sort
Are we
of.
good with 3A?
Well,
It-
I don't think we are, actually. So, on the pro side, I have tax savings for residents, and on the con side, that it may not be perceived as an ongoing tax savings. You had another con, which,
That
was
it can't
the
be
threat-
sustained over the long term. It's
And-
not a sustainable savings because of the changing valuation in commercial, but we can talk about that in the other. So if you want to leave it at that.
let's,
Leave it at
yeah,
that.
because I think the way you're formulating it, it's not entirely, we're not getting clarity as a
Let's
group.
keep it
So
simple.
let's,
That's fine.
let's,
Yep.
we'll move along
Yep.
and come back to
We
it.
can wordsmith these things next. You're on to me, Dan.
Let me give you Evan's next point. May provide needed leverage to spur action from big property owners. We've talked about this a little bit. Do we, first of all, do we really think this is a pro? And if so, is there an offsetting con?
Here's the rub on this that I discovered today, looking at a lot of numbers that Frank was kind enough to prepare for me. And John, you may appreciate this comment, but out of, what did I have today? I don't know if I have the number in front of me now, but I think, actually, no, it's in my email to you guys. There's roughly, and I say roughly, it could be plus or minus, maybe it's more plus, but there are apartment building owners in town. Some of them very large apartment building owners in
And you-
town. Because of the definition of residential, guess what, guys? They fall under residential. In my world, would consider them commercial, all right? So when you start to talk about business and residence, apartments fall under the residential side of the equation. So those guys, I think, is what Evan is getting at, need to be pushed because they're the ones who are gonna benefit significantly from the split rate, and they're not gonna pass the savings on to their tenants.
Yeah,
I can
yeah.
almost assure you that. I don't know that for a fact, all else being equal.
You're saying either pass them on or reinvest. My understanding of
Perhaps,
Evan is that
that's-
he was driving more at reinvesting in the property and kind of,
That's a an altruistic point of view, I can tell you, again, in my world, I'm gonna give you every side of the world I live in. It's best known in in the income property, residential income property business, that if you put money into a property, you don't make money. And I
Okay.
can give you example after example after example. You provide a minimal living standard. The tenants don't care about the property that they're living in. They don't have an ownership interest. It works for them. It works for the landlord. The landlord tries to squeeze whatever dollar they can out of it. That's a fact.
Okay.
Can you
The-
read Evan's statement again?
It just says, may provide needed leverage to spur action from big property owners. I think the other place that this idea has come up is with something like Oddfellows. Right? A property that has
So
been
that's the other side of the
kind
coin.
of
Yeah.
allowed to just,
Yeah.
it's, you know.
All right, I see
it's-
where his angle's coming from now, yeah. I maybe misspoke in terms
Would
of.
that be a residential?
That would not so much be residential, but I think there's
That's
still a
yeah,
question
well, no, I
of,
think,
is there a
actually,
return on
Oddfellows, would that be,
investment?
it's mixed use, so would that be fall into?
I think the point that a split rate is not going to affect the rental
It's huge.
units
That's
is
a revelation I had
valid,
today.
I think that's a valid
And
con,
there's a lot of big apartment
if
buildings
that's
in
what you're
town.
trying to use it as.
I do think, now that I understand Evan's point, is, yes, the properties that have been not utilized to their full
their
potential,
fullest.
maybe it's time to, because that's what he wants to see, you know?
Right.
There's a lot of
Mhm.
complacent property owners. Let's put a spark into that.
Right.
That's a- that's
So
a-
that
that's
the
a-
cost of sitting
that's a
still
legitimate-
is,
Pro, quite
Okay,
frankly.
okay.
That is,
let me run through, he's got a couple of weaknesses as well. And one I think is worth further discussion for sure. It's not income or need based. This would go to the tax savings for residents, right? They're not. It's kind of across the board. So it's not targeted in the way that an exemption
should
would
be,
be targeted.
not a specific need.
Yeah, right, that the poorest people get a break, the richest people get a break
Yep.
as well.
Yep.
I think that's an interesting con. I can think of kind of an offsetting pro, though, and that the very fact that it's broadly based is a pro in a way. It's a problem if you're trying to target these kind of savings to the lower economic class, but if you want everybody in town to feel like they're getting something, then this is the best way to do it. That's actually one of the cons to exemptions, is that you're
I think
only
that's a
giving a
political
break.
move, though. You're giving something to everybody. I don't see that as,
Well, I mean, basically the families who have kids in school are paying extra taxes because they have to pay bus fees, they have to pay sports fees, they
I
have
don't
to
buy
pay.
that at all. I would
These are-
fall into the seniors
Those are,
side.
those are.
What about the seniors?
Seniors-
Eric?
we don't have- we're not
Those
taking-
are taxes directed at only a portion of the population.
Yeah, but
And a savings
you're
like
getting the
this
benefit of the
goes to
school
everybody.
system.
But a senior gets a benefit of the school
Yeah,
system.
I understand, yeah.
And if there is a senior in Chelmsford or any town that thinks that a school system
It's
is not a
direct-
benefit
It's
to
not a
them,
direct benefit.
it most certainly is, because those kids being educated are going to take care of any senior that comes along later on.
In terms of
I-
valuation.
I see this reference to income or
Me
need-based
too.
as having more to do with the residential exemption.
I would agree, and I'm not for it, but yes, I would agree
Yeah, I
with
mean,
that.
yeah.
Yep.
I mean, that's a con
You
against,
think-
against residential. I don't see where that,
The-
is a pro or a con relative to adopting a split
split
tax
rate.
rate.
Right.
Well, I guess it depends on what your intent is.
What
I
your
mean,
intent
I think,
is.
I think I understand what he's saying, that if it's not targeted, then,
It needs to be targeted.
that maybe it's not as effective as it could be.
But, a split rate provides, the pro certainly is, it provides incremental tax to all residents.
So let me run through.
That's a fair
he-
statement.
He's got a couple of other bullets under weaknesses, and I'm not sure if they're all related to his top-level heading of the fact that it's not income or need-based, or if they stand on their own. Will not provide Route 129 zoning a fair or reasonable opportunity for implementation.
Yep.
That's not about it being targeted, though, right?
Again, I will say to you, it's about looking at what is the economic development policy of the town, and what are our long-term goals in terms of creating a greater commercial tax base.
So, all right, so.
That falls
I-
under that 3, so all that stuff falls under 3. I'm not sure.
Right, yeah, and maybe we can take out 129. Can we
Yeah,
make
yeah,
it
yeah.
a little
That's-
bit
it
more
doesn't need to-
general that it
yeah.
may not
I don't think it needs to be
compatible?
specifically identified. I think
Right.
the conceptual understanding of what the town's economic strategies are is all we need to say.
Yeah,
So it may not be compatible with the town's economic development
Yep.
strategy. Pits business community against residential,
Absolutely.
is
Absolutely.
that more of the same again, or is there something else there? Is there a political problem that maybe needs to be considered?
Yeah. Yes.
I will go back to our public forum and our discussions after the fact, and while I am here representing the CBA, and we all know what the position of the CBA is, I am a resident. I don't own commercial property. I don't want to see a split rate, okay? But to hear the disdain towards the CBA at that forum and that meeting really woke me up in terms of the dichotomy between residential or consumers and business people in the town. I really don't think it's a fair representation of what the CBA is. The CBA took the initiative to organize, to protect the business community. Us residents perhaps haven't. But it has created some friction and a dichotomy that I don't think we can ignore. We need to find a way to fix that. It's the notion I hear from people saying, well, businesses make more, they should pay more. That's just false. Business people take risks. They make investments, they employ people, they pay taxes, they pay fees, they do a lot of things that residents don't do. If it wasn't for businesses, residents wouldn't have a residence. There's a kind of a pecking order here.
Unless you lived in Carlisle.
Well, yeah. But my point is that I was surprised to hear how much of a negative tone there is towards the Chelmsford business community. When I live and breathe with business people all day long, how passionate they are about giving back to the community, and their businesses, it was disheartening, quite frankly. I felt really at oddity that day, and it was an eye-opener for me.
I hear what you're saying, but I guess my question would be, is that a result of a split rate, or is that,
Yes.
or is that a reflection of a more basic?
I don't think it's the result of a split rate, because we're not there. I think it's a
I-
result of I think Helen's helped bring the residents to foray here. No, and I think that's a good thing. The residents should know, and perhaps that's what
Should know, yes.
Selectman Diggs has been trying to do all along. Let's get people to hear what the issues are, get them involved. They haven't been involved.
And they don't want to be.
So, all right,
Yes,
so we go
and
back
it's
to square
horrible.
one.
It's
A
horrible.
split rate doesn't make it better.
It's horrible.
I think it's a result of a single rate, because I feel like many of the residents think that there should be a split rate. So there's the animosity right there.
I will,
And that surprises me, given the fact that the businesses don't get all the benefits of of the single rate.
People
never
do not
mind,
understand it. If
split
they
rate.
want to
well, they
understand
do
it, they
get more,
can,
wait a
but
minute, wait a minute. I'm going to argue
Come
that
on,
one.
I liked you before I started.
Wait a minute, but wait a minute. What I'm not saying, I don't know, I'm very confused about this, and this is why I'm saying what I'm saying. But businesses in Chelmsford and any town have more of a benefit than, say, seniors do. And let me tell you why. They get their roads plowed, they get their roads paved. They might not get their garbage picked up, I agree with that. They might not have kids in school, but if they didn't pay for school, then those people coming up wouldn't be able to work for them part-time or full-time. So that isn't where I think that the disdain is. I think the disdain is hearing some of the business people make the remarks that they remake. And that's worse and has nothing to do with a split or a solid, a split or a single tax rate as much as it does with the comments that they said and the threats that were made. And that's the sad part about it, and
Yep,
that's where I think you
agree.
need it.
Yep, no, I'm not gonna disagree with you there. I think, but it's nothing but an organization that's trying to stand for fairness, equitable taxation, fair taxation. A split rate gets us there.
And
It's
it-
not, a flat rate gets us there.
We got it, we got it.
Take that from the record, please.
And I agree.
Would you repeat that,
with what you're saying, Tom. But I think that the point could have been, can be
Softened,
presented,
yep,
can be,
duly noted. I
Can be
will
sh-
take responsibility on behalf of the
Not-
CBA
no.
board for that.
you don't have to, because I think it's somebody else in the CBA board that
I
needs to
understand.
take that.
I understand.
But that's not what we're here to discuss.
Yeah, and so I'm inclined to leave that one off of the list just because I think it goes deeper than the narrow issue of the rate itself. That there may very well be a split between some of the residential folks
think
and
there's a split.
some of the business
has
folks
nothing
in
to do
town.
with
And it
taxes.
needs to be, it should be managed and it's something to be aware of but it's not coming.
It's a political outcome rather than a
Yeah,
financial
It
outcome.
really is.
And that's.
Don't be mistaken, the business community in this town, it gives a lot to this town
Yeah,
and
no.
its residents, a lot.
But when you use the word, what did he use, the word pit in there, went
Yeah,
against,
right,
that's a
pit. I think-
political,
yeah.
that's,
He's got a couple of other weaknesses. Sends confused message to the real estate development industry, and split runs counter to the town's economic development goals and objectives.
Which I've already, yep.
Yeah, I think those are again kind of just a broader expression of what he was talking about with Route 129,
Yep.
and,
Yep.
and that's a legitimate con that you may be sending two messages.
The welcome wagon's there, but by the way, you're gonna pay more than everybody else.
Other.
Don't start.
Okay.
We had, at the public forum, 6 or 8 CBA members get up and tell us their story.
I don't think there was 6 or 8. There was,
Well, they were small business.
there were more,
They were small business.
yeah, a couple of them were not CBA members.
Okay. I don't have the list, so I'm not aware who is and isn't. There was no residents stood up at the microphone and said, we need a split rate, and here's why. There was no documented evidence by the 8 or so people that came to that microphone that had, this is why we shouldn't have the split rate.
I think we
It was
heard-
all opinion.
Okay, I'm not gonna disagree with that. We're talking
And that
about,
bothers-
talking about opinions most of the time here, so.
I
But I think
understand.
the most of them were valid opinions, not all of them, but
I
most of
don't,
them
I
were.
don't say they weren't valid opinions, but the key word is opinions,
So let's talk
because
facts.
we don't know what the facts are.
Well, I think, given what we've learned over the summer, we have some pretty good ideas on where we need to steer this committee. We may not have the facts that we hope to get, but we have more facts today than we did.
I'd be
when we
willing to
started.
bet 80% of the residents of this town, and that may be a big number, but a significant portion could absolutely care less.
About the
About
tax.
They make an enormous amount of money and live in a house that is probably overpriced today,
No, I beg to differ with that.
and,
I do too.
and they could care less what their tax bill is.
Oh, no.
And they
Oh, no.
don't know. Now, you're looking at a simple designated,
Oh, no, I'm looking at.
Community.
I'm looking at my daughter who's leaving because of the tax rate. No, that's not true.
and I had 5 people on my street leave, and those houses sold like that.
They do, yes. I'm not sure right
Someday I'm gonna
now.
leave because
And
of
we
the
went,
tax
and
rate,
we
I
went
grew
from,
up here.
we went from
You
old
tell me
people
not
to
but
young
I'm going
people.
to.
And the young people made twice as much as the old people.
Say the last
I had a
sentence.
discussion with a member of the Board of Selectmen some years ago, that he used to meet with the residents on a Thursday night, at Panera's in Drum Hill.
Had
And
to
when
be-
I complained, because I was retired and I was on a fixed income, by the way, I get almost exactly today what I started getting 12 years ago. But that's my issue. How am I going to continue to live here and pay the taxes and blah, blah, blah? And you know what he said to me? Well, you may have to sell your house and move to a condo.
Well,
And that,
condos are
first of all,
cheap living.
infuriated me. Second of all, he's absolutely right.
No, he's not, because they don't understand
I'm
condo
gonna do
living.
it. But we're kidding ourselves if we're not gonna evolve later on into a
As
different
long as I
place.
can do what I'm doing where I'm
Yep.
doing it,
Amen.
I'll
But-
stay there.
But I will tell you, and this is off our subject, moving to a condo does not necessarily mean that it's cheaper living by far. Never mind the taxes, it doesn't mean it. You have assessments, you have a lot more to take care of, and you have condo fees on top of your tax rate. So unfortunately,
Maybe
that
moving
has,
to a different area.
that's
That,
true.
not so much a condo. I gotta tell you, I hear stories all the time. My daughter lives in Alabama. She pays $800 a year in taxes, and her neighborhood's as nice as yours, her house is as nice as yours. Those are the things that we're all faced with, those decisions when we get older. We are empowered amongst ourselves to make decisions that impact our lives going forward. And it's not up to the town to tell us or help us where we wanna go. It's up to us to do that as individuals. And I don't know, Alabama, if I can get a couple of my friends to move down and we can be neighbors, that doesn't sound like a bad idea to me. $800 a year versus 8,000?
But when it's flooded, God bless you.
But
It's
the
those
point is though,
copperheads.
condo or whatever, we all
Whatever.
faced with moving on at some point in
Yeah.
time. But listen, I grew up here.
So did I.
I'm a native. I don't wanna leave the town, but I see myself, I'm planning ahead. I'm still got a few years, but I'm planning on the exit strategy at some point. It's gonna happen. You know, maybe my daughters buy the house, I don't know, but it's just, it's a fact of life.
I approve of the idea of moving on.
It happens.
Well,
I mean, come
it's,
on.
it's funny because Evan's next point, he listed as an opportunity rather than a strength, is housing may be more affordable and seniors may be able to afford to live in place longer. I
That's
think-
yeah, I agree with
We
that.
do agree with that. That would be a pro.
As what item now? That just split rate in general?
Just a split rate in general.
So my only,
No,
my only comment to that is, again, I'm gonna go back to relative terms. We're talking small changes.
Little
right,
numbers.
it's too
They
small.
really, I don't, I'll go on the record and say $200 doesn't matter to me on an annual basis. Maybe it means more to a senior today, but that's still a small number in relative terms, and especially as rates, valuations go up and levy goes up.
Okay, so the
It's-
kind of the.
It's always unaffordable at some level.
So the kind of the counterpoint con would be that the savings may be too small
For a decision like that, so.
to keep somebody in place, or
I think it's
or if
immaterial.
or if it were large enough, then the hit to the CIP side
There
would be.
are thousands of households in Chelmsford that are housing burden, and for them,
Okay.
a small amount could be a significant amount.
Yes, I agree with that, definitely.
Okay.
And I've seen that, and I
Situation.
don't.
Depends on the situation.
Okay, under threats, his top one is lack of predictability from year to year, BOS actions. Is that a,
Political.
yeah, is that a con or is it a feature?
Well, if one accepts the fact, and I think it's not unreasonable to accept the fact that if things are unpredictable, that's bad. Unpredictability is bad.
And it's unpredictable because you don't get the same board every year
Right.
or every 2 years or whatever.
And, you start to talk about Leominster and their stable government, then life is a little more predictable, I guess.
Right. I start to say something, and I need to go back to just a little bit, because there is somebody in this room that will know what I'm talking about. But I was someplace recently in the past couple of weeks, when somebody came up to somebody I was talking to, shook their hand, and said, "Oh, we're gonna get a split tax rate." So Mal says, "We are? I didn't know that. I'm on the committee. Who told you that?" And this person said to me, oh, well, we voted it. And what I said was, what you voted for was the committee, not the split tax rate. So I just want everybody to be aware that there are people that think that vote that was taken so that this committee is going to go and say to the selectmen, you have to do this, and
Non-binding.
I
Please.
agree, but
So
they,
again, a
but what I
misinformed
said to
public.
them is you don't know what you're voting for when you go into that voting booth, and until you do, you don't understand half the time why we're in the predicament we're in. And I know that the person that's in this room that heard it will agree with what I said, but I do want everybody to know that there are people out there who voted for it who think that this is what's gonna happen, and it might not, it might not. That's all I had to say, but I thought you guys should know
That goes back to
that.
the residents not taking an initiative and getting involved,
In anything.
right? Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
You
I
can't
agree,
be, you
I
can't
agree.
put your head in the sand and expect things to go your way. You
Yeah.
gotta get involved.
Yep.
So are you looking at that as a con
I'm looking
or
at it as a big.
for a single rate? The
Right. I think it's a
For a
con
single
for
rate,
a
the
single rate, yeah.
yeah,
And
People don't
you know,
understand
they don't understand.
because of the vote.
And I think that that's something that has got to be brought out, and the selectmen have to
The dissension
help us get
in the
it
town.
out one way or the other, but I don't know what we put in there, but if I don't know if the general public is gonna read, if they didn't figure out it was non-binding, how are they gonna read this report? Doesn't matter.
So I really think,
Well, I'll stand with John that education is part of our mission, and, you know,
Right.
we'll do what we can. But, yeah, I don't know that we can fix that by ourselves, I
Right,
agree.
right. But I think we have to put it in writing on how we
Well,
get to it.
We're
right?
kidding ourselves, that we're gonna make the complete general public understand what we're writing. So
Yeah,
we
we
should be
never-
writing to the audience. The audience is the selectmen, and if we try to dummy down as much as we can, God bless, but
Right,
a lot of people aren't gonna get it.
right. They're not gonna get it.
well, but
one
I
way
think
or
that
the
I think that's one of the issues the selectman needs to have in their mind when they're
Sure.
voting. So I think that should be a con on the single rate,
That,
that the public's not gonna understand because of the vote that they took. There's an implication there that they think it's gonna change. So just, I don't know how you
Yeah.
wanna word it.
I mean,
Yeah,
I
succinctly.
didn't realize that until this, and it was in this building. It wasn't in my development or anything, and it was in this building. And it was two people whose names are known much better than mine, because, you know, it's just, you know.
not anymore.
I still think they know, most people know their names better than mine.
Okay, that pretty much runs through everything that Evan had. Are there other thoughts?
Are we still on A?
Well, we kind of are, and I think some of the things that you've listed as threats
Yeah.
are perhaps more properly critiques of the
They're
kind of the
cons.
topic.
Yeah.
Well, for example, the spreadsheet calculation of a split rate, your 3E threat, I'm not sure. I think that's a sort of thing that should be mentioned when we do that write-up, but I don't know that
Absolutely.
it's, I don't think it's necessarily a con or a,
It,
to
it's
the.
not a discussion
to the
item,
rate. Right.
if that is at least if that grid is qualified with
Right.
that statement, that's fine.
Yeah, right.
So, just for the record, you know, we talked about SWOT analysis, so that's how I kind of
No,
just formatted this,
I
so-
understand.
But I'm totally fine with duly noted in the, that topic item.
Right, yeah, some of that should be incorporated, I think. So I'll stick with A for the moment. Or B, I suppose. Are there does anybody have other ideas on pros or cons for a split rate, implementation of a split rate that we haven't gone over already?
Two. One, that we can restore the levy to the historical averages for commercial versus residential.
Can you explain that further?
Oh, yeah, so Frank has provided like a long history of what the levy was, residential versus CIP.
Yeah.
And, I mean, in general, it's gone up, and it's.
Residential's gone up and.
The residential levy's gone up, it's higher than it used to be, and it's higher than the long-term average.
And this, and I think the, kind of the theoretical underpinning of that is that,
Get 129 on Route 40 going.
well, no, that residential
Values have gone
property
up
seems,
faster.
seems
Yep.
to appreciate more
That's
than
happened,
commercial property does. And so even if they start out at kind of the same level, over time, they diverge a little bit.
The other one is that a split tax rate can make the tax system in Massachusetts slightly less regressive.
Since it's not,
That's a political statement if I've ever heard one.
yeah, it is. And
I don't
since
think
it's-
politics needs to be
And
put into
since
this
it's not,
analysis.
it's only related to income in the sense, how is it related to income?
Because all taxes are measured as it related to income when it comes to regressivity.
Or
How do-
progressivity.
Or
I
progressive.
We're talking
understand
flat
that.
tax here, we're not talking regressive or progressive at the moment. If anything, it's progressive. I don't know why we need to regress, but it's a flat tax system that we're debating here.
Okay, well, the Institute of Taxation and Economic Policy has analyzed the tax system in Massachusetts. And when you factor in all taxes in Massachusetts, the top 1% of taxpayers in Massachusetts pay an effective tax rate of 4.9%, and the bottom 20% of income earners in Massachusetts pay an effective tax rate of 10.4%.
So because I make more, I should pay more progressively, is what you're stating is the.
No, what I'm saying is that our tax system in Massachusetts is very regressive.
It's regressive because we have a flat tax system on the income side, we have a flat tax system on the sales tax side,
Right.
and for the most part, we have flat tax on the real estate side.
No,
Yeah,
It's a tax
I
that's
don't-
fair and equitable.
No, again, it's regressive.
It's regressive in a sense that, listen, if I'm making a gazillion dollars and I'm paying 5%, and you're making $10,000 and you're paying 5%, you're right.
But no,
But
but
he-
you're not listening to the
But that's what he's
numbers.
saying.
You're not listening to the numbers.
That's the problem, right? The guy making $1 million a year is paying 1%, and the guy making $20,000 a year is paying 20%
How can that-
of his income.
How can that
in
be
tax.
with the income tax system, with the DOR that we have in place today? You can't, it's not like the IRS where you have all these crazy loopholes and deductions, and even though they supposedly have fixed it, the revenue, the DOR for the state of Massachusetts has a flat tax, income tax. You pay what the same rate no matter what you make.
Which is only part of taxation in Massachusetts.
Okay, so what's the
well,
other part?
but-
Sales tax?
Regressive.
You're paying for what you buy.
No, regressive.
Because I make less and I buy more, it's regressive?
It's regressive. It's
If-
regressive. It's well known.
If I'm
as
making
being
$1 million
regressive.
a year and you're making $20,000 a year, presumably we eat about the same amount of food. So presumably we pay about the same amount of tax on the food that we eat. That means a larger portion of your income is going to tax on the food that you eat than mine is.
But I'm buying the Lexus, you're buying the Toyota.
Not necessarily.
Are you kidding me? If I'm making $1 million a year, I'm not driving a Toyota.
Some people,
That's,
If you're buying a Lexus, you are.
that's
well,
how they
you're
get.
right, that's not a good example. I'm
That's
buying a
a good
Bentley, you're buying a
example.
Toyota. It's, at the end of the day, you have a choice, though. It's again, we get back to choices.
I just,
You want to grow
John-
old in this town and stay here and pay your taxes, that's your choice. If you want to move on, that's your choice. You want to buy a yacht, a $2 million yacht, that's your choice. You want to buy a rowboat, that's your choice. That's how you're taxed. It couldn't be a more fairer system.
say that again, what your
Okay.
state.
Again, this is from the Institute of
I
Taxation
make
and
more
Economic
money, I should
Policy.
pay a higher rate of my income? That's
No,
bullshit.
it's,
Excuse
no,
my French.
it just,
What I'm saying
No,
is,
I get what you're saying.
no, what you said relative to the advantage for split tax rate.
oh,
relative-
the split tax rate would make the tax system in Massachusetts slightly less regressive.
I don't understand, I mean, how does something, you're reducing taxes for all residents in the town, how does that make taxes less?
The property tax system is really significantly regressive
Yeah.
system. And a lot of the
From an
effect,
income perspective.
a lot of the
But-
effect comes from people who are aging in place. And as their income goes down, their taxes stay the same, right? So that they're paying a much higher proportion of their income in taxes.
So if you want to be the Socialist Republic of Russia,
But,
make it so that the less
Or-
fortunate get more.
But the less fortunate aren't necessarily gonna get more with a split tax rate any more than
No,
the
every-
benefit than,
Kind of where the focus should be, but it is kind of going on the same
Everybody gets
road.
more.
everybody
with a-
gets,
With every
gets more
residential owner gets more, right.
with this split tax.
They pay less in taxes.
pay less in
right?
taxes.
That means if you're a retiree on a fixed income, you're paying a lower percentage. Well, again, if your income is $20,000 a year.
I'm catching you.
Here's the issue, we're digressing to other taxation issues
Yeah,
right now
it-
that we can agree or disagree on. The issue at hand here is a real estate tax. It's not the IRS tax, it's not the state DOR. It's split rate in Chelmsford. That's where our focus should be. Not bringing in global analysis that, quite frankly, to me is BS. It means nothing to me around this table.
You know, Evan made one comment at one meeting, and he's right. And it stays with me. We have to only worry about, when we're talking about the tax rate, that we're basing it only on Chelmsford. And only on Chelmsford.
Let's focus on our community and what our community needs, what our social and economic needs are. We can't cure the state's problems if we think we have state problems or global, national tax problems. We
Right,
need to
and
focus
also-
on Chelmsford.
But it also means you can't move just because you think it's the choice. We
I
gotta make
do
a
agree
choice.
with that.
I know, but
Are we
there
on
are
to C?
people.
We all evolve, it's circle of life.
No, we're still,
Not yet.
And I'm gonna be
Still
in that
don't know where
circle
we are,
sooner
but-
than later.
okay. I just don't think that,
Oh,
It's-
see,
it's
I-
going-
I-
it's
I
going
think
to-
it's one of the major pros of a split rate. I think regressive tax systems
I
are
think the
bad,
savings,
and-
the savings
but
are going
I
to be so
understand-
minimal that it's to talk about changing the
Well,
balance
again,
and
I think
progressivity.
this goes, that goes back to the question of, does it really make housing more affordable for people who want to age in place? And I think,
It doesn't.
well, I think
I think it does.
I think we probably all have our own views on it. I'm reasonably convinced that there's a portion of the people who live in town that it is a big enough change for it to make a difference. I don't think it's gonna make a big difference for me. So I understand that point of view as well. And again, this then ties into the fact that it's not a targeted savings, right? We're not directing all of the savings to the people who need it the most.
That's right.
So that's not a great thing. But
But wouldn't you
We'll
be
leave it at that, I
targeting
think.
it to the people who need it the most?
You're targeting
Well,
it to-
Again, that's
Well,
more of a
you're giving it-
residential
you're giving
exemption
it to-
item, maybe?
right, that's probably more effective at targeting it. Although again, there's still some issues there.
There's still, nothing in particular for the person who has a high-value house that's increased in value despite the fact that they're now retired and.
Well, that's the challenge, right? Is
Yeah.
even with that. All right, but let's move on to C if we can.
It's all about choices. Make good choices.
Right.
All right, the summary of the split rates. I don't.
I don't think,
Where are you?
This 3C, the summary of the split rates
And-
in
and-
Massachusetts and Chelmsford. Okay,
and
fine.
my
We do
view
have,
is-
we've got the table that Frank provided us. As John pointed out, we're kind of at the low end of that range for the last, 40 years it goes back to 83?
When you say the low range,
Of
the high range for the residential?
the high range for residential, low range for CIP share.
can I just mention that I think logically, when you put this together, you need to move C down to, where is it? Before F. Calculation of split rate, review
Okay,
of the
yeah.
effective split rate, review of the hypothetical, and then you're gonna talk
Okay.
about other communities in precinct.
Okay.
That's where you wanna
Okay,
talk about the
the
historical
historical aspect of it.
perspective, just logically.
Okay. So the table of the effect of the split rate on the FY18 values, that's fairly non-controversial, right? That's a simple one-year calculation. The review of the hypothetical split rate since 2007. as Thomas pointed out, it doesn't try to model any kind of
Right, it's
knock-on
misleading.
changes.
Because mathematically speaking, commercial rate's gonna go down. You tax more, income drops, valuations go down.
I
Point-
put a minor version of that table and pointed out that we were looking at 4 distinct
Yeah, that's
properties
fine.
and they're not.
Yep, that's
yeah.
fine. Again, as long as we
But-
qualify the
yeah.
tables, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah.
and maybe a double asterisk, but,
Yeah,
as long as we qualify the tables, that's totally fine.
Okay. I don't think we're talking, I thought
There-
you were talking about pros and cons for
Pros and
split
cons,
rate
and
in general.
I just,
and it-
well,
Go on to the next section.
Well, Tom especially has kind of gone through some of the subdivisions there, and I just want to make sure we touch on all of them. Again,
Thank
some of them are more critiques than,
Critiques, yeah.
than.
Except for 3F.
Cons. So, yeah, review of split rates in other communities. So this is where, there's actually some evidence that the CIP valuation doesn't drop when you implement a split rate.
If all else is equal, that's not the case.
Right.
And things have changed for that to happen. Things, zoning or a 129 someplace else has exacerbated the valuation. We can't be saying that valuation in and of itself is in a vacuum.
Well, I mean, of what, 19 other communities with a similar CIP share, only one of them saw a long-term decline in the CIP valuation.
But listening to the guys from Leominster, they've taken an active role in developing, their community to be what it is, and here they are comparing themselves to Fitchburg that saw a decrease in their valuation because they weren't active in the economic development of the commercial side. So my point is that there's more to it than just saying valuation is based on this. There's other things going on.
Well, the difference is that Leominster has a mayor.
Maybe
And a
maybe it
whole-
is. They have a
it's a
stable
whole
government, a very
different-
stable
a
government.
whole
Without
different kind of
selectmen
government than
changing
we
like
do.
like I could change my socks.
Well, I'm not sure,
For a mayor.
fine, but mayors change like you change your
But
socks.
they haven't in Leominster.
But they haven't in Leominster, but also, maybe years ago when this started, the selectmen and the people in Chelmsford wanted this to be a bedroom community. I don't think we are anymore. I think we need to evolve into something that is bigger and better for everybody concerned. I think that Chelmsford has a lot to offer if we think out of the box, and I think we need to think out of the box. Sorry.
I think we're doing that, starting with 129. We are acting like a proactive economic development.
We should have been doing this a long time ago.
Absolutely. You can blame that on the,
Yeah, that I don't.
whatever, but.
Whatever, I don't know
Yeah,
what
we
it is,
can't-
I
we-
just
we-
doesn't.
The fact of the matter is Chelmsford today isn't gonna be Chelmsford tomorrow. It's gonna be a different town. And it's
But
gonna be-
remember, think about this when you're thinking about this. Never mind, let's go to what the towns change like. Think about something like Bedford, who had a split tax rate and was just like Chelmsford when I moved into it in 1980, or it was 1980. But it's now a whole different ballgame, and that's what I think Chelmsford wants to become in the end. So and they've had a split tax rate since
They
1981.
enjoy the proximity of Burlington too. That's a different animal, and we
But
can't
they didn't
correlate.
before.
We can't correlate these split rate scenarios. That's what we're saying here.
Well,
Yeah,
I don't disagree with that, but I also think that the claim that the commercial values will inevitably drop because of the formula isn't borne out in the real world, which I think you're saying it already, but it means that other factors play a role in what happens, and while the point that the income approach or evaluation model
approach, yeah.
is, a significant, it's a concern, it should probably be listed as a con. The other side of it is that it's not an inevitable law of nature. Right? It's not like gravity.
Honestly, you couldn't have said it better. Again, getting back to, I would have changed that to a
Yeah.
con versus a threat based on the direction we're heading last week. Again, I'm fine, as long, these are bullet items that need to be duly noted in our review, in our formal report. And to ignore them,
Right.
would be remiss on our part, because there are a lot of things that can happen. But to look at a table and say, this is gospel, is BS. There are other things going on.
I completely agree with that, and
Thank you.
I think also we can agree that what happens on the ground in the town is more important than the decision to go with a single or a split
Yep,
rate.
absolutely.
Tom, in this under 3F, you said there doesn't seem to be any correlation with what
Where
in
are
those
you talking about?
communities? Under what you have,
3F.
what you have under 3F, your first
Well,
point.
just in terms of the CIP residential mix and all that, the proximity of a suburb to a city, we've kind of looked at
Okay.
everything.
Yeah, I wrote
There's-
down with correlation, and I said with what? And
I
you're
think-
saying with the ratios of residents to CIP or the
Yeah.
kinds of,
Yeah,
okay,
or
that,
proximity to a major
Right.
city. I think Evan said it best, maybe it was 2 weeks ago, but, he said, hey, it's what the community feels and wants.
right, the correlation needs to be better defined, correlation
yeah.
with what? And I just wanted to make sure I mean, I thought that's what you were getting at, is like we've talked a lot about, the people who came in and figured people of split tax rates all have CIP ratios of over 20% or whatever, and it's
Right.
just not true.
Right.
And that's the
If
kinds of
anything that's
correlation.
enlightened me with this exercise is that, wow, it's just not, it's so gray.
Yeah, right.
It's so gray.
You have a couple other threats listed there that I think one we've touched on and one we haven't.
Yep.
Implementing the split rate is contrary to the town's economic
Yep.
strategy.
I
We've
don't
got
need to talk about
listed
that
already.
anymore.
Um,
I do think
the-
that, although Dan doesn't like this comment, I think we'd be remiss not mentioning it, and I will use this as my experience with talking to the business community. A split rate could, I'm not saying will, shall, it could hurt the community in terms of reduced donations from businesses. Our businesses support our local charitable organizations like nobody's business, schools, youth activities, you name it. And I've heard from some business owners that said, hey, I'm gonna cut back. That's just the bottom line, I'm gonna cut back. I've heard others say, well, I give to the same people every year, and I'll probably continue doing that, but someone else comes in, forget it, I'm not gonna. It's a real issue for the community from a social perspective that we can't ignore. Is it a big issue? Is it a small issue? I don't know, but it all depends on what happens.
Yeah, again, if this list of pros and cons is a kind of a worksheet or a checklist for the selectmen to be, things for them to be looking for as they monitor the implementation of any strategy, then I think it should be on that list, because that could be one of the early warning signs that something is.
You just don't know.
And it kind of goes back to, is there some dissatisfaction or I don't know, rivalry between the residential and the business sides to begin with, or does it come out of something like this? My guess is it's already there, but it certainly, it bears
Well,
watching.
that
I do
that
think the
can-
residents don't understand how much businesses give back to the community.
That's
I really
true.
think that's kind of I gotta tell you, working for the Lowell 5, man, the money that we give out every year, I feel so good about the organizations that I support, and that's just me in Chelmsford. That's not, we've got 400 employees that are all asking, taking from the same well, and we're from Merrimack Valley down into Westford. We give a lot of money back to the community, and I know a lot of the small business community does the same.
Okay, let's think of it this way. I heard once, well, never mind what I heard. If the businesses feel that they cannot continue to give if it goes to a split tax rate because they will be hurt, did the businesses ever think that maybe if they don't continue to give to the community in Chelmsford, Chelmsford doesn't have to give to them, and they can go other places to buy the same goods that they sell in Chelmsford? Just a
Work
thought.
that way.
I call it a boycott.
Yeah,
But it's true.
I don't think it's gonna be anything wholesale like that statement alludes to, but
I'm just
I
asking.
do
if that-
think that, I don't know, pick an organization, pick a sports organization that, has to raise, each kid has to raise $100 for their team. Maybe they can only raise $80. Maybe they can only raise $50. Who knows? Maybe the sponsorships decreases from 20 to 10. You know, that's gonna get pushed under the rug. No one's gonna be saying anything until the time comes when they didn't get the money they needed to make their budget for their team.
Okay, I'm just threw that out to see if there was
Listen, you can't sit here and say that the business is an enemy of the community. They just are not. They are here to help and do whatever they can.
But so aren't the
But the small
residents.
business community that is impacted by some of these rate scenarios that we're talking about, man, they're significant. They wanna make money. Remember, they're in business to make a profit. They're not in business to make a loss. They're taking risks. They're investing in a community. All of this is one big, circle of life here, and if it comes time to cutting back expenses, I can tell you, personally, charities is the first one that I start cutting back on. I mean, we'd be crazy not to think of that. I mean, that's the
I
fact.
just needed to ask that question.
Yeah, that's fine. I don't take it personal. I'm just trying to make my
Right,
point, that's all.
I'm trying to make the
Yeah.
other side, and
I-
so
I
I can
will-
understand
So-
it better.
So I'm gonna digress a little bit in this subject, and I promise just a little bit. But in terms of the new IRS codes, we're all getting whacked with the, not being able to perhaps itemize like we used to, and we're gonna be forced to take these new exemptions that are more generous than they were in the past. But I can tell you right now, my charity line is coming right down because I had a much bigger number when I could itemize before because of charities. It's a direct, you're gonna start to hear about this. You're already hearing on the news that people aren't withholding enough because they got their taxes are gonna be higher than they think. No one's talking about that. 3 months ago, I started taking out more money out of my weekly check to make up the difference, because I was onto it. Same thing's gonna happen with charities. I guarantee you, next year, you're gonna start to hear charities are gonna be struggling because people aren't giving as much anymore because they don't get the tax deduction. It's gonna happen. Charities are a line item that is
Right.
discretionary. It can go away in a nanosecond. Enough said.
Okay.
I think you're right.
Yeah, no question. I agree.
Review of initial split used in other communities, I think that should be straightforward. That's
Yeah,
just-
I
that's
think,
just
I
a-
don't think there aren't
data
pros and cons,
analysis,
so
right.
that's just
The
information.
effect of the split rate on the CIP sector value. All right.
So I
that's-
gave you
that's-
my
yeah,
dissertation
that's-
on
that we-
that.
That's where I think we've more or less gone through.
Yep. We don't need
I think, right, a lot of your remarks, again, I think we've already got.
We don't need to beat a dead horse here, but my only enlightening that I had today was that apartment building owners benefit from a split rate.
Yeah,
In my world, in the commercial lending world, apartment building owners are commercial. In the taxation world, they're considered residential. So, you get the 150 unit apartment building that, whatever we call that rate, that's a direct benefit to them, and you could probably, assume that money won't trickle down back to the tenants. Again, at least in the short run. Maybe in the long run, but not in the short run.
okay, I think that's the split rate.
I'm getting laryngitis.
Small commercial exemption,
Running a lot.
Evan has a couple of thoughts.
Frankly.
For pros, it may provide relief to small locally owned businesses. The con, it's a limited pool.
Say that again?
It's a limited pool of businesses that are eligible for the deduction.
It's a lot smaller of a pool than we think.
It's pretty.
It is really just providing cookie crumbs. like
I guess it
mentioned last
depends on how you look at it. If you look at the, kind of the valuation of those properties, it's really quite small. By number though, what do we have, like 450 some commercial properties and something like 114 or 115 are
that's what
eligible?
Frank had
So
mentioned.
you're close to a quarter of the properties are, that are in that, in the commercial sector are eligible. But yeah, they tend to be the small ones.
I would argue that if a split tax rate was implemented, then this would be, like with the residents, a small reprieve for the very
Yeah.
small population. I'm not for it, I'm not for either, but
Right.
It, sort of con, it is if you don't have a split tax rate, but you do have a small commercial exemption, you may have a small business paying less taxes than a similarly assessed home
Right.
residence. I think they found that in Westford this year because they had
Yeah, I'm not so sure this exemption makes sense without split rate,
without a split rate.
but that's what Westford has chosen to do.
Yeah,
I always
but
thought they were.
Well, it
hand in
does
hand.
sound like they're ready to be done with
To
it.
get rid of
I
it.
mean, it doesn't seem to be building their small commercial pool either.
And I would go on record to say that the small business community in town isn't looking for this. The bigger issue is the split rate, not the
Mhm.
exemption.
For an opportunity, Evan thinks there might be an opportunity for pass-through savings to business.
Say that again, please.
Understand that.
He says, opportunity for pass-through savings to business. I'm not quite sure how to
I
think
think
of
he's
that
tying
either,
in
just the,
the IRS tax with,
Ah.
you know, again, I think that's an issue that's really off the table. That's,
yeah,
federal taxation can change tomorrow.
yeah.
It's, has nothing to do with what's going on in Chelmsford and valuation.
yeah,
rates.
and because for threat, he says no pass-through, then increased cost to business.
Oh.
Is that even right? If you're not,
Are
is
the-
he saying if you're not a pass-through?
So what he's saying is that oh, no, now I'm not sure what he's saying.
Is it possible what he's actually talking about is passing through the tax savings from the property owner to the business, as opposed to anything more complicated than that?
Yeah, and perhaps he's talking about the situation where the landlord holds the title and rents or leases space to a business.
So, Tom, what you think?
Again, I
I
think
think-
that's a different issue.
Yeah,
It's not a.
right, I'm not sure that's a pro or a con in that sense, yeah.
But I'm just curious, what's your sense on that? If we did have a situation where we had a property owner who was benefiting from it, how likely are they to pass it on, or any of it to the business?
I don't think likely at all. I'm talking to property
Well,
owners.
they'd be subject to the tyranny of the market, presumably.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and I
mean,
understand
if enough landlords pass it through or drop their rates, they're gonna have to drop their rates to be competitive, but if
It's a
not,
market.
then-
Yeah, I
Right.
understand, I understand the rental market, so what you were saying earlier
Yeah.
about the
Yeah,
rental
same-
market
I
makes
would say the
perfect
same
sense. but
thing. I
you
mean,
think
let's
the same?
face it, you know,
I-
we all want to make more money, so if that's an opportunity that benefits them, I'm not so sure that would directly correlate into savings to,
Yeah, to a business that's leasing
I'm-
space.
maybe over time, because of rental rate
Right.
changes or market condition changes, but
I'm just thinking to me, the commercial real estate market just seems to be very different from the residential, in particular rental market right now. It just seems to me, but.
the demand's a lot lower in terms of
Yeah.
office space around here than apartment space. I mean, it could be used as an incentive, I suppose, but I think the population we're talking about with the small business exemption, they're not property owners. They're not big property owners.
I was
These are
gonna ask
small
that, yeah.
mom and pop type of situations.
And chances are most of them don't own their own properties.
Right.
Well, I'm not so sure. I mean,
I don't know.
You know, if you're really a garage kind of company, then
Yeah.
you do own it. I mean, I can think of a handful of people who have, you
Are
know,
you
who
working
live
out of
in
your
town and
home
they.
garage? You're working out of a
Well,
commercial garage?
Think
Usually they're working, the folks I'm thinking of typically have another building in town that they
Yeah.
work out of, and presumably they'd be, you know, they'd be covered. I can't imagine that the property's worth more than $1 million.
Yeah, I'm sure it's not.
But again, you're talking about 1, 2, 3-man shops, something
Right.
like that.
Right.
It's not.
Yep.
All right, any other thoughts on pros or cons for the small commercial? I think you've said it, somebody just said it well, that it really is an offset if a split rate's adopted. You're trying to minimize
Yeah.
the pain
Yeah.
for
Yep.
a subset of the business community.
So I guess, you know, if we were to make a recommendation, if there was to be a split rate, then that should go hand in hand with a split rate.
And that's how the voters voted.
In the advisory question,
The
is.
binding advisory
the
question.
non-binding.
No, but
All right, residential exemption, starts out with Evan, the strengths or pros, it's income-based. So it's a little bit more targeted. He doesn't
No,
say
it's not.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
residential exemption.
It's not income-based.
You know what, you're right.
Only to the extent
It's-
that
it's-
people with lower incomes own lower valued
Right.
properties, but
That's you know what, that's
not a-
actually an excellent point. So,
yeah, this is for 200 and something thousand dollars or less. I forget what the number is.
No, it's,
basically less than the median value, so $399, right? I mean, right around the median, you're not gonna see much difference one way or the other. Well, yeah, let's refigure that then. Is that a pro or a con that it goes to lower value homes?
Depends on what kind of. It's-
to the extent that it's a,
Is it a useful targeting tool in terms of driving the benefit to people who presumably need it more?
well, it's a pro in the sense that to the extent that people with lower incomes own lower valued properties, it's certainly a benefit, but but you have to acknowledge that not all people with lower
Right.
incomes own such properties.
Right.
That some may own higher valued properties and they will see, and then it's a con, because then they will see an increase
Right.
in taxes.
Well, in terms of cons, is this subsidy, so to speak, borne by the town or is it the state? I don't remember which
No,
one.
it's-
By the other,
by
by
the
the
other
other houses in
Okay.
by the other homes in the town.
So, I mean, that's a con.
Yeah.
Unless you're in favor of a progressive system of taxation.
Well,
I think you can tell by now, probably not.
but again,
So-
it's not progressive because it's not related to
Well,
income.
that-
It's only
right.
related to income
I
in
wanna
that,
own a
It's
castle,
kind
I
of
pay the tax on the
right, it's
castle.
an
I wanna own
indirect
something less, I pay the
attempt.
tax on something less.
yeah.
Right.
I keep my property up, it's worth more, I
Right.
get penalized, that makes no sense
But
to me.
that's right.
Yeah, it's
No
a
sense.
penalty. You
It's a
know,
penalty to someone who,
who's paying higher taxes anyway.
Let's take the incentive
Is-
away from property owners to improve their
Right.
properties. and
Well,
keep their
wait,
neighborhoods up.
I'd like to just double check that. We talked about this a little bit at the public input session. Improvements on a property in terms of kind of keeping it neat and orderly do not improve the property's values. Physical improvements to the plant,
Physical improvements, adding additions, updating decks, updating bathrooms and kitchens. Many of those things, to a great extent, are almost a maintenance issue. With respect to keeping it neat and tidy, I think the presumption is that all homes will be kept to some extent tidy and up-to-date, grass cut, painted timely, that sort of thing. In the event that a home falls into disrepair with deferred maintenance that is evident, particularly if it's the kind of maintenance that causes damage, leaks in roof, which we see, we can and do, when we become aware of it or pulled out there, do put a factor on the home, reducing the value, trying to recognize the fact that if that home in its current state were put on the market would not necessarily respond well to it.
right, it would not sell at the same
I wouldn't think so.
price as similar.
As a comparable home,
Square
similar
footage,
year, vintage,
lot sizes.
but in better or average condition,
Right.
that would capture more in the marketplace, I would think. That's how we attack,
Yep.
that's how we look at condition. If something's in relatively minor disrepair, not as inclined to put a factor on it.
Right.
It's kind of a judgment call, frankly.
And this is, your evaluation is based on a physical inspection of the home.
That's right.
So you walk up to a home and you see it hasn't been cared for on the outside for 20 years. Chances are, it probably hasn't been kept well inside either.
That's a reasonable assumption.
And you're gonna knock on the door, you're gonna hope to get a walkthrough, and you'll adjust the valuation accordingly.
Particularly, depending on what I see. If I see, or when I do see untidiness, just a mess, that's a personal choice to some extent. And some people just live that way. And
I don't.
Functional obsolescence is different, that's what you're.
That's
getting
right.
at,
Functional obsolescence is, just to make a distinction between functional and economic obsolescence. Functional obsolescence is something that would be wrong with the home that is fixable by the owner. And economic obsolescence is something that is wrong with the home that isn't necessarily able to be addressed by the homeowner. The classic example would be power lines going right over your home. There's nothing the homeowner can do about that.
But replacing a kitchen is more.
Replacing a
functional.
kitchen that's 30 years old and doors hanging off, functional obsolescence, I might place that on if I see it. I see the permit come through, we follow up, we remove that obsolescence.
How many, and it must be in here, I just don't know off the top of my
Okay.
head. Do we have a lot of $200,000 and $300,000 homes that are single-family residences?
A lot? No. I can't give a number, but no, no. That are single-family homes, no. Condominiums, that much more of them, yes.
Well,
But
most of
single-family
them are
homes,
condominiums.
because a buildable lot, I mean, a lot is, minimum $200,000.
Okay.
Some are less, when, it almost doesn't even matter the size of the lot, as long as it's buildable.
If you have somebody who has a $200,000 lot for sale, let me know, I got 10 people that.
That's why I go on the low end, absolutely. That was, they sell for, because they're what? They're the diminishing resource,
Okay.
which drives up the value.
Do you have an idea of how many condominiums there might be out there within that valuation? Just, I don't mean to put you on the.
No, that's fine. We have 2,600 condominiums. I could do an analysis on it, just keeping it in the $200,000 range, probably a third, I'm guessing. Condominiums go for,
Yeah, yeah.
particularly new ones. Particularly new ones. And of course, up in North Chelmsford, there's another complex up there that's doing quite well. Just to get back, we did have one year out there.
When I bought it,
Sorry,
it
good
was,
sense of
it
humor,
was
by the
only
way.
200,
Dialogue today.
when I bought it, it was only $200,000.
I don't remember ever that complex.
Oh,
being-
yeah, yes,
Well, you'd have to concede that's not the case anymore.
I concede. I definitely
Hey,
concede.
Frank,
But in,
a question about the condos, while we have you. There are also commercial condos, yeah?
There are. Up in, we have office condos up at, I don't know if anybody's familiar with Courthouse Square, it's behind Hannaford's. That is office condos, there's probably a couple hundred in there. We have some on Stedman Street, we have some right here on Billerica Road, 139 Billerica Road. We have some industrial condos also up in North Chelmsford off of Smith Street,
There's some on Summer Street.
Summer Street as well.
Off of Fletcher, aren't those kind?
Yes, Meeting House,
Meeting
Village
House,
Square,
that's a
all those are commercial condominiums.
And the difference is strictly based on the use.
Yes.
If somebody's, it's not any other, it can't be declared to be a commercial condo if somebody's living in it. If somebody's living in it, then it's a residential condo.
Well, yeah, and I think the
And
health
it has to
inspector and the
meet-
building
yeah, it
department
has to
have
meet
something to
other
say about
codes,
it.
yeah, uh-huh.
But yeah, we go by the use of it. They're almost
Yep.
all doctor's offices on Meeting House, and that's
Mhm.
clears. The industrial ones are garages, just garages with a small dedicated office space, but predominantly they're just garages. So they're industrial in their use. And particularly when getting back to the small commercial exemption, I'm willing to bet that almost all of Courthouse Square is a pretty good example of units that I knew. I find it difficult to believe that each and every one of them didn't have 10 or fewer employees. And I would think all of those would qualify. But they weren't all listed on that sheet that I said the state provided. I have to go by, at least initially, what that state provides, even though I kind of have my sense of it, that whole complex would probably qualify and eventually would be on the list.
And they would, yeah, so at least the first year,
They would be-
you'd want to expand the overlay.
Yes, I would think so.
And then, so if they came to you and asked for an abatement on that ground, how, does that go into the record somehow so that you don't have to go through the same song and dance next year?
As far as the exemption is concerned? Yes, they come in, they apply for it just as they would any other abatement challenging their value. They would be making that statement that they have 10 or fewer employees. I would look for verification of that. Once myself and the board is satisfied, they'd be given the exemption, and then looking forward, we would presume that would be the case. I don't know.
Would there, so you have to pull their payment records, right? To
Yeah, we
the
would have
month-
to pull-
the monthly
they gave-
payroll, and is that the sort of thing that gets then filtered back up to the BLA or whoever it is that's keeping
Yes.
the worksheet?
Yeah,
So the next year, they should be on that sheet coming to you from the state.
One
so
would
you don't
hope
have to
so,
go
yes,
through
I
it
would hope
again.
so, yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know how the reporting goes to the, I have absolutely no clue how that's managed. We just get the list. Then I just
Right.
cross-check it against buildings that I know are valued less than $1 million. If they're valued more than $1 million, I can eliminate them regardless of
Right.
whether they have less employees or not.
okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
No problem.
So is it a pro that the residential exemption might target condo owners?
I don't know if that's, based on what Frank just said, I wouldn't think so. I think it's a very limited population, small sample.
But are they more likely to be fixed income?
Yes.
I think a lot of them are probably first home buyers that are, moving up the food chain, starting a family.
I don't think in Chelmsford on condos. I think you've got
Hard.
more over 55
So
condos in
maybe under
Chelmsford,
pro, we could say
I think, don't you?
I
Might-
can tell you,
might
my
help
first home was a condo.
first time,
No,
first
I
timers
understand that, but I think that they have tried to
and
Retirees.
retirees.
continue school district.
Maybe,
And the con
Yeah,
kind of would be that it's
right.
still not income based.
That's right.
Kind of the corollary
That's
to
right, yes.
that, right? That
Right.
the,
Corollary.
and that the other con that you pointed out was that you're shifting the burden to the more expensive homes in town who are already paying a larger share.
and have.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And the biggest con, rental properties.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Rental properties.
The rental properties, they
They-
don't,
they don't s-
they're not owner occupied, so they don't qualify.
They don't
So their
get any
taxes are gonna
benefit.
go up.
Okay.
Yeah, and your sense
No,
is that
no.
that
Not
Yeah.
residential,
And under a residential exemption.
the residential exemption, it has to be
Spread. Okay,
It has to
I-
be
yeah,
owner occupied
yeah.
in
All right.
addition
sorry.
to being residential, right? And your sense is that there's enough pricing power in the market that the landlords wouldn't have too much trouble passing it through.
I mean, I
would agree
agree
with
with,
that.
I agree with Tom that they're not gonna pass through the savings, but they are gonna pass through
That's right.
the high
Yeah.
taxes. That's the way the market is right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean,
What are they
again,
gonna-
I think it's a supply and demand thing. At some point,
When the lease is up, the rent's going up.
if supply ever exceeds demand, it'll go the other direction regardless of what the tax
That
situation
ain't
is,
happening.
but, you know,
That ain't happening.
not around
Yeah.
here, man.
Not around here.
Okay. Any other thoughts on the residential exemption?
Only, it isn't one way or the other, only it says something if nobody in the state does it except resort communities
And
and
Somerville.
Boston. and
So
some-
that I don't understand, right? Because if you break down the towns that use it, maybe half of them are resort places, but the other half tend to be places with large, low income and high English language learner populations.
And not only that, Somerville got a home rule petition to increase
Right.
above the allowed. I don't get it either.
Is it just that the markets there are, again, that the pricing power is not there to pass it all the way through, and you're somehow just
Try buying
cutting
real
into
estate in
the.
Somerville. You think it's expensive here.
Well, that's
I was just
yeah,
gonna
that's
say something.
I don't know.
I guess they've had it for a long time because, 20 years ago, the demographic in Somerville was different than it is now.
Oh, definitely,
Right?
Everyone's name. ends with an
definitely,
A,
it was, yeah.
with a vowel, I should say.
I'm just gonna, I don't know if this is an issue or not, but we talked previously about, in the context of the split tax rate, about the potential for perhaps increase in contention between the business community, residential community. Could a residential exemption cause tension between the high-end property
Yeah,
owners and the
the
low-end
haves
property
and the
owners?
have-nots, or
Fair
the
statement.
yeah. Okay. Okay. In between 5, which is a residential exemption, and 6, which is exemptions and other reductions. I have a section 5.5 for the combined scenarios. Is there anything that would be, this would be,
So you leave these?
this would be, yes. Yeah, we talked about that a little bit last week, and somebody thought it would be better there. This would be having a split rate and a small commercial exemption, or having a split rate and a residential exemption, or all three. Are there any real pros or cons to kind of a mix and match approach that aren't already pros and cons of the approach by itself?
I would say there's a con to doing all three at the same time. For this, I'm gonna go back to my days as a software engineer. If you change too many things at one time, it's tough to figure out what went wrong when things go wrong.
I think there's a con going with a split rate and a residential exemption. You're essentially double dipping. And to John's point,
Although the residential exemption doesn't affect the commercial any more than simply the split rate does.
no, but you're benefiting the residential side twice, and you can't determine.
Some
the
of them.
cause and
Yeah,
effect.
you're only, yeah,
Some
you're
of them.
really only
Right, some of them. I
benefiting
understand
half
that.
of them or so.
Don't we have a
But to
chart?
John's point, I think, if you're gonna do something, it should be done in increments. Figure out what's working, what's not working, figure out the cause and effect, deductive reasoning, and move from there. The only, I guess, again, I think the only exception I would have is if you're gonna have a split rate, you should have a small commercial
Yeah.
exemption, which I'm not in favor of either,
Right.
but I think those go hand in hand.
Yeah, that would be the only combination that I would see as,
Yeah, and I don't know,
Meaningful.
and I don't know where it fits in, but what Tom said is absolutely true as far as I'm concerned as well. If you're gonna do anything, do it gradually.
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure that's necessarily a pro or a con, but I would strongly support that as well. And maybe the place for language like that is in the discussion of the initial split rate. Making a point that most of the towns that, in our survey that introduced a split rate, walked it up a little bit over 2 or 3 years. Chelmsford obviously walked it down over, I think, 3 or 4 years. And it's easy enough to see why when you look at the impact.
And I was glad to see that was true. And the model I use here is actually monetary policy, the Federal Reserve. Because the Federal Reserve is making significant changes to interest rates over time.
Right.
And they do three things. They say, this is what we're gonna do, this is when we're gonna do it, but we're gonna change our mind when new data comes in. And so, do it gradually, let people know what you're gonna be doing, but be prepared to change your mind.
You saying the Fed's fickled? You saying the Fed's fickled?
I'm saying they say they're willing to change their mind if data indicates they should. That's what I'm saying.
They give themselves an option.
Yes.
Keep them guessing.
Okay, exemptions and other reductions, pros and cons.
they help you if you qualify.
So they're a little more targeted.
And these are more state funded, or?
Well, so that is true to an extent. There are a couple of exceptions to that. One is the 17s, which I still don't understand. It looks like we're not getting any reimbursement there. And the only way I can see that would have happened was that one year we had a 0 there.
I'm unclear as to why we don't.
Yeah.
We submit these every year on the gateway system. They give us what they give us. There's tremendous fluctuation yearly. And like you've noticed probably that the vast majority of the reimbursement is in the veterans.
Right.
Probably 80% of the reimbursement.
And the way the state has written it, the reimbursement on the veterans is generally more generous from the state. They do seem to have a genuine sense of ownership of those exemptions. Yeah, the 17s we should get some. So most of the exemptions now have been updated. There was a more or less fixed amount at one point that was, in most cases, mandatory, and the town was then reimbursed for giving those exemptions. Along the way, changes were made to the rules, mostly increasing the eligibility, loosening the eligibility requirements. So raising the amount of income you could have, raising the amount of estate that you could have and still qualify for it. And the offset at the state level for loosening those exemption requirements was that they didn't necessarily reimburse the towns for the exemptions that were granted under the new less restrictive rules. The other big one, and I think if this was one of the questions I had for you, but I think if I've done my reading right, I understand it, and that's that double personal exemption. It's my understanding that the town can decide to essentially double all exemptions. They can pick and choose which ones they double. They don't have to increase it by 100%, they can increase it by 50%, but once they choose to do that, they have to grant it to everyone. They can't say only some of you get it. If the town chooses to do that, that additional exemption amount is not reimbursed. So we could more or less double what we're giving in exemptions tomorrow. It's just that we wouldn't see a doubling of the reimbursement from the state.
But yet somebody would have to pick up that difference.
It would be revenue foregone, right?
Absolutely. What we would do is increase the amount that we put in the overlay. The overlay is an account that's dedicated to the assessor's office, and it's intended to offset when somebody applies for an abatement, we grant the abatement, because at the end of the day, the levy that we've all been speaking about for months is an absolute. So we set aside money for bad debt, for lack of a better term. So if we grant an abatement on a property, money comes out of the overlay to satisfy that levy and keep it whole. That's also true with the exemptions, that the money comes out of the overlay account. We're reimbursed for part of it.
One question?
Sure.
How does the overlay, do you have much left over?
It depends on the year. They used to look at it year by year. Now, the state changed it a couple of years ago where it's all kept as one line item. We do hold on to a number of years because there is some provision where somebody can go for an abatement up to 3 years after the fact. So we want to keep money in there in the unlikely event that something like that happens. So we always keep some sort of a reserve in there.
Sometimes it's substantial, as I recall when I was on the FinCom.
We released some money a few years ago, so it's not quite as high as it
Yeah.
once was.
But sometimes when you release it, it's a meaningful
It is.
amount of money.
It is.
This we haven't accepted that, is that correct?
We have not.
No, that would be a vote by town meeting. And as Mike was alluding to, we've made the changes on the age and some of the income and asset requirements. We dropped the age from 70 to 65 and increased both the asset and the income limits to the maximum, to the point where they're tied into the income is tied into the COLA, so there's an adjustment on that each year.
So, whereas a pro for all these is certainly their targeted exemptions to help. The con is in some cases, there is a cost to the town.
Right, exactly.
But it sounds to me as it would be a minimal cost to the town versus any other.
We're doing about
If we were to do, one of the things that makes it difficult to establish what the impact would be, we know definitively how many we get, well, we could average it out, how many exemptions we grant a year. If you do tack on an additional $250 or $500, that's certainly easy enough to calculate. What I wonder is, by offering a $1,000 exemption, would we pull in people who, up until now, have been a little bit reluctant to furnish the assessor's office with some of the information that we do require, most notably the income tax return. Some people, for obvious reasons, are reluctant to, furnish us with that. But for $500, for $1,000, maybe for $750, you get their attention.
So that possibility, changing these could create additional
right.
work for the.
One of the things I mentioned a couple weeks ago I was going to try to do is find a community that went from 500 to 750, 500 to 1,000, call them and say, what was the difference? There aren't that many communities that did it. And I tried to pick ones who had done it somewhat recently so there would be a chance the assessor was there or somebody with some institutional knowledge could answer it. There was nothing really newer. It had been done some time ago. So intuitively, I guess I would think we'd get a bump in the number of applications. My instinct is it wouldn't be a dramatic spike, but.
But it might help the most needy people.
It absolutely helps the most needy people that are of the age. That's the
Right.
other issue.
That's right.
This does target people who are 65 or older. There,
Yeah, that would be a benefit.
Well, it's a benefit in the sense that it's targeted. Once again, I'd say it might be a con in that it's targeted and it's not available, that it's not income-based, I guess, is the way I'd put it. If you're 35 and you meet the
Oh,
income
okay.
limits, you're still not eligible for the age-based exemptions.
But you can work more when you're younger normally,
Well,
Well,
you see,
I
so
mean,
I think it's a benefit.
that's the hope, I think, but I think that's one of the, that's one of the things about these more restrictive exemptions as opposed to something like a split rate that just goes to everybody.
I really think it targets in a good way, in a positive way.
the people that it targets, certainly it's positive for, but it's not, I see your point, I never thought about that, but it doesn't help out a low-income person who doesn't meet the age requirements.
Other pros or cons on exemptions?
There's just no one size fits all.
Yeah, not only is there not that, but in a sense, every one of these tools is a hammer, right? And so they're hammers of different sizes, but they're still all hammers. And it doesn't help you if you've got a screw.
Split rate's a sledgehammer.
Yeah, it is.
I think the whole tax thing is a sledgehammer.
Okay, anything under additional approaches? Tom, you had
So,
a remark.
I don't even think I remarked on my
yeah.
email, but I guess, I'm gonna go right to D because I was told that's where I should be focused on, and I decided not to approach that only because I think it speaks for itself. At the end of the day, I think it's incumbent upon our government to look for ways to save money and reduce the levy, and I don't see that happening. And I don't know what else we can say except put exclamation mark after that comment. Simple as that. There's gotta be, we shouldn't be raising the levy every year just because we can. Period.
Well,
I know we have big operational overloads with the pensions and health insurance and all that. There's cost savings out there. I'm telling you, if the government was run like a business, we'd be saving money. We wouldn't be raising
Depends on
our
what
expenses
business.
every year.
If it was run like Enron, it'd be,
No, that's not a
we'd
fair
be all
statement.
in, we'd be in worse shape. That,
Not a
I
fair
think,
statement. I think there needs
course
to be
it is.
attention given there. I also think there needs to be attention given to, and forgive me for not knowing the correct law, but we have a state funding formula that we seem to be getting cheated out of every year after year after year. Just saying, why can't there be more effort put into trying to figure out how we can change that? I'm not saying it can be changed, but that should be an approach to, how
Well,
we fix our tax problem.
yeah, Chapter 70 is not gonna be the answer to our problems.
Because why? Because we can't change it, or because we don't want to?
Because we're already getting more than we're supposed to. And it's really hard. I'll defer to Mary on it, but it's really hard to come up with a formula whereby Chelmsford does better than Bill Ricca.
So this is
I
where
mean-
I'm ignorant in this whole thing, this formula, but I see Westford does much better than we do. A much more affluent
Westford
community
has
than we are.
benefited from hold harmless provisions, essentially.
I think they're probably, I haven't looked at this year's figures, I think it's probably pretty much evened out.
We're getting close to
We're,
Westford.
we're
Really?
getting
Okay,
close,
all right,
and
then I-
Westford's school system has, when all of this started back in '92, Westford's school system was much smaller than
Yep,
Chelmsford's.
we had our growth in the 60s, I get all that.
Yeah,
Right.
We've
our
got
growth was
worn
in-
buildings
And that is part of why there's that
Yep,
imbalance.
yep.
But-
we grew in the '60s, and they grew in the
in the
90s.
90s, yeah.
Yeah, which
in
was
the
just the right
90s.
time.
And in terms of school size, total enrollments, Westford and Chelmsford are relatively equal these days. So if we get similar shares of state aid, it's,
Well, I stand corrected, because the last time I saw those state aid figures, they were lopsided.
yeah, no, I hear you, and we complained for years, and that was, sort of, it was the way it all worked, especially when it started out, it had to do with what your spending was when this started in 92, when a school, and then you got percentage increases on that. Well, the school system, or you were forced to increase your own resources, a percentage on what you had been spending. And when you were already spending a lot, because you had a bigger school system than a system that was smaller early on, you got these, discrepancies, and then the state made up for it. You were only required to, increase by a small amount. Your school system was growing, and you were getting state aid to compensate for that. And so you were getting a whole lot more, and that was the way Westford works. But there's a whole lot of historical, they never take money away from anybody. And even by the formula, when all of it started back 92, you did the formula, okay, these guys are getting more than the formula says they should get. Well, we didn't take that money away from them. They just kept getting it. And then so much, and in recent years, so much of the money that's distributed, we want to make sure everybody gets something. So we give everybody $25 per pupil, whether they qualify for more by the formula status or not, and that continues the inequities.
And in fact, that's why we're getting more than the formula says we should at this
Well,
point.
then I
because
stand
we've had-
corrected,
We've
again,
had
it's
years,
been a while.
well, it's, there's what the formula says, and there's what is really needed, and then there's yet a third category of real life. And there's no question that the state provides more of a subsidy to each child in the Westford system than they do to each child in the Chelmsford system. Both systems spend well above what the state prescribes as a minimum kind of level of expenditure, because that's what it takes to educate a kid these days. It is frustrating. There's a political reality going on too, right?
Oh.
We're in year 5 now of the foundation budget reform, and with no real end in sight.
Oh, well, no, the
we're
last
still-
reform committee was only maybe 3 years ago.
Okay, only 3 years
I
ago.
was on that
I
committee.
know
on
you
that
were.
committee.
I know you were.
And
And-
I mean, they fought.
But they still don't have they still haven't implemented all of the
They,
recommendations.
they got it, one version passed in the Senate, one version passed in the House to increase the foundation budget, and then they couldn't agree, so they didn't do either version.
But you're talking, what, a billion
Well,
Roughly?
I don't know, it could add a fair amount, I
to
can't
to
remember.
fully implement it,
They-
which
they-
is one of the reasons it's taking a while.
Anyway,
The trouble is, it sucks out all the oxygen in terms of school funding reform. We're going to have to settle that before we move on, I think, to the next big round of reformulating the budget, or the distribution formula. And again, it's very difficult to come up with a formula that benefits Chelmsford in a way that doesn't benefit Lowell more. I think to say that that's where the solution lies, you're setting yourself up for a loss. But it's not uncommon to have 5-year plans in politics, but this is, I think, Chapter 70 reform is something like a 5-year plan. It's not going to happen next year. I think it's not to say that the select board shouldn't be pushing ahead on that. They should stay in touch with the legislature. They should make sure that they understand whether the current proposal is going to help Chelmsford or not. And I think there's some open question about that right now. I think you could say the same thing, though, about local aid. I think you could say the same thing about lottery aid. I think, if you look at kind of the share of the Chelmsford budget over the last 15 or 20 years, it has been basically a steady compression of the help from the state
Right.
level, right? We're more and more relying on the local property taxes to fund everything that we do. And I think it's not at all unreasonable to suggest that it's time for Beacon Hill to step up and start funding a larger portion of what we're doing, especially in as much as they're giving us mandates about how to teach the kids, or what, you know, building codes, or whatever you wanna point to.
What
That-
you're saying now is great, except that when you look at this, just an observation I saw when I attended one selectmen's meeting, when a gentleman stood up at that podium and said, "I'd like these 15 streets to be accepted," and find out that they've been paving them and plowing them and keeping them up since they were in existence in the 1600s, for Christ's sake, I mean, for heaven's sake. And
I'll take it back.
so what I'm trying to say is, maybe somebody should think about, and I don't think it comes under the selectmen, but I think somebody should say something to somebody, that they should start looking for other avenues to save money, because he's bringing in streets a little at a time where where we have lost the gas tax from those streets for all those years. It might be a little bit, but a little bit here and a little bit there and a little bit there is a big savings that should be brought in. And if we're paying these people to do a job, and it was this gentleman that finally found it, you have to give him credit, but what happened to everybody ahead of him? So how much else is
But isn't the
there?
developer maintaining those roads if they're not accepted? That's what should be
I
happening.
think so.
No, these are, no, these aren't like ours. These aren't like like we're
Oh, these are
maintaining it.
existing roads
They're
that,
existing roads that were, yeah, they're little
They're-
streets
they're-
here and there.
We've
Gotcha.
been getting a lot of them at town meeting for
Yeah.
acceptance. They're working on.
But I'm saying, right, and
Yeah,
he's
they-
working
there
on it,
have-
and he's
there
doing an
apparently have
excellent
been some
job.
over the years that,
He's doing an excellent job, but how many other things in town can be looked at like that we've overlooked for years and years and years that nobody thought of? Just a thought. Just a thought.
We need to license chickens. Now I've lost my audience. Yeah, I mean, stuff like this
Yeah.
is kind of beyond the scope,
It
the
is not in
formal
here,
scope
it's
of the
just the
report. But
reduction
I
of
think
levy.
it's worth, yeah, you know,
Yeah.
it's worth maybe making the point. Is there anything else there under the additional approaches?
I think we beat it all to death.
yeah, I think so.
Certainly hope so. I think the last thing about this is these pros and cons. Do we more or less agree that we're going to put them into the relevant section as opposed to having them all at the end?
That's what we had talked
Yes.
about last
Right.
time. That's what we had
Yes.
agreed upon.
I think so.
Um,
I think.
Okay. Okay.
Otherwise, you're gonna have one hell of a summary.
And I think it may feel a little disjointed
Yep.
if
Yes.
it's not being surrounded by the
Yes.
material. All right. I think then that brings me to the question of who's going to write what. Does anybody want anything in particular?
Well, you have, between the two of us, under split rate, A, B, C,
I think that's
And E.
covered for the most part with all the
Yeah.
feedback we have
Are
here. I
written.
don't know if there's a lot more to write.
well,
I-
what we have under introduction, the first thing, the section under 3, that's just putting the words together, the historical summary of split rates and F, G, and H.
So those should all be
Those-
in my 5:30
I mean,
mailing.
we have the
So-
information, we just
Yeah.
need to put the words together on a piece of paper. The section, what's listed here is sections 4 and 5 certainly have good drafts written. Yeah, you've got,
Yeah, so I think 4 and 5 especially, we're at a point where it's a question of what do we want to see in there? What or do we prefer prose? Do we prefer tables? And I'm perfectly willing to
let's just look at what's.
do that next week, yeah.
Yeah, let's get a draft, what we
Mhm.
consider a final draft together on that. section, on the section on exemptions, you have the list of all the exemptions. You need some prose
Oh,
or
the
whatever to
historical
cover,
ones, yeah.
say, B, C, D, and B, C, and D of
All
that
right,
section.
yes, you know what, I'll work on that, that's okay.
The 5A section needs to be done. And then the,
Do we not have that?
Yeah, I
Additional
thought we did.
stuff.
do you have that?
I think we do, for the residential.
Have it twice.
Yeah, probably.
Have what? The,
One readable.
do you have in a form that goes with it, the combination ones?
No.
Not
That's what I was referring
Okay.
to, where what you were
Yeah,
calling
the
5A.
Yeah, uh-huh.
I'm sorry, is section
5.5?
5.5, whatever, that, I'm
We
sorry.
can renumber at some point,
That,
which is really just plugging in different numbers to the scenario calculator, right?
again,
That-
As amended.
it's tables, but you need the verbiage that ties them together. Not necessarily a whole lot of verbiage, but it needs
Right.
to be done.
All right, I will put some
And
words
then
around
the
that and
additional
send them to you,
approaches
John.
section,
I'm sorry,
well, we've
The,
talked about what
so-
goes into additional approaches, but we,
A lot of
again,
this
really
is
haven't
duplication,
Pardon?
especially in item 7. We've talked about these in other areas. Growth of
Yeah.
CIP sector, economic development, that was talked about in
it
section
may,
3.
it may be.
the combination of split and SCE, I think we talked about in section 3, or,
Well, that was what we just.
Well, so 7A, yeah, that was more, I had that as a kind of a placeholder for the Route 129 stuff,
was talking.
right? I just pointing out that if, that you can expand the overall pie, right, and if you,
Yeah.
and if you do that, then the rate will go down.
so, but I mean, is it safe to assume then that the items listed in number 7 are really just kind of bulleted items? These are some of the things that, you know,
Well, we
other
just,
things you could be looking at.
well, we just talked about, he said, B and C under
Yeah, under
the
5.5, yeah.
combinations.
Those are already,
Well,
Yeah.
we've done things with tables and whatever, but
Right,
just,
right.
just putting them together, calling them a 5.5 or something.
right. So now you just got A and
Just
D.
pull, right, A and D.
Yeah,
There's 2 sentences, maybe.
Really, that's all it is.
okay,
I mean,
okay.
I mean, you can go, you
maybe
can go.
as many as 4,
But you
no
can
more
go-
than 2
You can
paragraphs.
go further to say that, you know, other things to consider are A and B, and,
Yeah.
you know, while we haven't, you know, delved into these items, they're certainly, you know, worthy of further exploration of the
Okay.
item,
Two
blah, blah, blah.
two-sentence
Right.
paragraphs.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
fine.
that's about all it takes for that.
I do want to point out one thing, you know, just because we've had a discussion a couple of times, and I haven't had real information to refute the numbers, but, and no offense, John, but you've talked about the tax burden on real estate, commercial real estate properties being around 2%, and we had some national data to look at a little while back. I had the pleasure of digressing and looking at some of, analyzing some of the real data that we have at the town, thanks to Frank. And out of 434 commercial properties, not including residential apartment buildings, I had already done that analysis, and then Frank enlightened me to what the situation was with that. But the average levy burden on gross rental income, gross, not net, gross, was just over 10%.
What's the numerator, what's the denominator?
The numerator is 704.
Not the numbers, what are you putting in the numerator, what are you putting in the denominator?
I'm putting in total gross rental income
As the numerator?
for the 434 properties of 131 million. And then the levy for those properties being 13,300,000,
Using the levy,
what they're paying in taxes.
okay, the tax levy, okay.
It's just over 10%. Getting back to local economics, much different number than looking at it from a national perspective, and more in line with where, I thought, quite frankly, that number was low. I thought it was higher than that, but certainly much higher than 2%. make what you want with that information, but that's from the town assessor's office.
Well, I think we should find a way to put that in to the split rate discussion, right?
It's a big
Does that
burden.
make sense?
It's a big, like I said before.
I think it makes perfect sense.
But why are we looking at the rental income ratio to the tax levy?
Because
As
this
opposed
is
to
information that John kept bringing up in his statistical
When you say
analysis.
tax levy, you're talking property tax levy, right?
What their property tax bill is.
Property tax bill, yeah,
versus
so it's,
as
so
a
it's,
percentage of gross rental income.
it sounds to me like it's a different numerator, it's a different denominator. I'm not saying it's invalidated, it's just measuring something differently.
What is being paid to the landlord?
Yeah, they're paying- the landlord in total, the landlords, the population of the town of Chelmsford in terms of commercial rental income, excluding residential rental
Mhm.
properties, is 131 million. Out of that 131 million, they're taxed at 13,300,000.
So the numbers that we were looking at, I think it was last week, the numerator is state and local taxes, and the denominator is the, all of essentially the cost of the firm.
This is the cost of this is exactly the cost of the
Oh,
property.
you said tax levy.
That's just, this is, if you want to talk about total cost, it's significantly higher than that. This is just, I don't have that with me, but the total cost as a percentage of rental income, which is how you should look at percentage of cost to a operation, I think was like 80 million in total.
Okay.
The bottom line is,
Yeah,
the
I've-
net profit to these unit owners or these property owners isn't what you had led us to believe with the ratios you were giving us.
Well, the ratios you're talking
Yeah,
about are different ratios.
I think, yeah, my understanding of what John was presenting was that he was trying to look at the relative burden that taxes represented to a company in terms of its overall operating costs.
Right, which is what the
But we're
statistics on
looking
income
at
report.
real estate. We're not taxing companies individually, we're taxing real estate, we're taxing real property. The split rate affects real property owners.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that more.
That's a big
'Cause I need
distinction.
I need to wrap my head around
Because there
what
could
that
be,
means.
a conglomerate that makes gazillions of dollars a year that doesn't own real estate. It could be just a real estate, REIT or whatever, holding company, that's owning the property and earning an income from it. That's what's happening here in this town at the end of the day.
Because I've been imagining it more along the lines of if you have a company that's making widgets, and they have their raw material costs and their transportation costs and their labor costs. Well, yes, unless they're all robotized. But yes, you have their various costs, and their rental or their lease cost is part of it, and trying to understand how a shift in that rental cost would affect their operations, right?
Well, in terms of small business owners, and again, I think the majority, was it 81% of the commercial property owners are considered small business?
Less than $1 million a day.
Less than $1 million,
81%. Okay.
81%. So there certainly are outliers that, the Zolls of the world or whomever.
Right, yeah, mhm.
But the burden of taxation is on the property owners, not necessarily the business operators.
Okay. So, we still don't have any assignments. We think we're pretty much good with 2 through 6, yes?
I'll take it, I'll work on it.
Okay, so Mary, you'll work on the introduction.
Review of assessing process, had you done something on that?
Yeah, I sent it out to, that was part of the 532.
Okay.
So take a look at that.
Stand.
And that's mostly cut and paste from Frank.
Okay,
We had also, in the introduction last week, we talked about a list of speakers, and I know Sheila's been working on kind of summarizing those. Maybe you can just generate a list or a paragraph about who came and
yeah,
who came
I
and spoke, and maybe
I
their
saw what you
topics and.
put, and I guess my only criticism was, mostly what you put was just what you took out of the minutes.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't,
I don't think the minutes told the whole story.
And the minutes didn't
No,
tell the
you
whole
know, with all
story.
due respect, I appreciate you taking the effort, but I think it'd be worthy of noting the videos like we had talked
Yeah,
about
I
before,
just-
because
just
there's a whole heck of a lot more that gets missed in the
a list of the
minutes.
people that we had come in and the dates and then a reference to seeing the video for
Yeah.
that date, I think would be sufficient, because certainly the minutes
The
don't.
minutes were brief at best.
Right.
Well,
There
at
were
least,
6 people,
yeah.
and then I didn't know if you wanted the comments from the public input, not people noted, but just in
Yeah,
general.
I mean, again, I think, the best we can do, I think, is to have a short summary of kind of the topic of discussion, and then send people to the video.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because a
A
short.
one-liner, this is what we
Yeah, right,
discussed.
like, this is,
Yeah,
so-and-so came in on this day and,
More information
and talked
referred
about
to.
this,
Okay,
and
yeah,
check out the,
that's easy. I can
Right.
just pan it back.
John, you've been working on a couple of appendices.
Well, the one
We-
I sent out with the surrounding
The
community data.
community data.
The other one I mentioned was, we had the list of studies. I don't know if we wanted to put that in an appendix or not.
Some kind of bibliography. I think, why don't, will you circulate it
Sure,
and see what people think?
Yeah. see what people think.
the one that,
Oh, your, something about housing burden, I think, might be appropriate in the residential exemption. I think all you really said was, you can expect you can expect the increases in the taxes to be passed on to the renters. Is there any more to be said than that? Okay.
I thought that covered it, but.
the historical and that stuff, is that? I looked at it and thought about trying to address it, and I said, it's, I don't know how much people want. It got complicated. I was gonna have to go through too much. I sort of gave up. Well, whereas there are others who have looked at that. I know John looked at that a
Well,
lot.
yeah, I think one of the points of the historical summary, at least in Massachusetts, was just kind of, he put together maybe a one-page kind of significant dates, court decisions, things like that, kind of explaining how we got where we are.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess the other thing, and the first thing I was looking for was the number of communities, I know you've quoted that, in Chelmsford, or in Massachusetts, that have a split rate.
So,
Yeah,
110?
110.
I
One-
can get you a list, but it's about 110.
I just wanted a number, 110.
110 is right.
Okay. As a way to, if you're gonna start talking about other communities and say, only, what is it, 351
Yes.
towns?
You know what, 349 show up. I'm not quite sure why. In the
Close enough for
DOR
government.
data.
Sometimes, if you're looking at a given year, if a community has not submitted or got certified a tax
Yeah.
rate, the data sometimes is not found.
Okay.
That can't be
I think
know.
I think for FY16, which is the last one available with all the shifts and such, it's 110 out of 349.
But there are 351 cities and towns. That's a number that I used to spout out all the time
Right.
when I was doing school stuff, so. Okay, well, I don't know that I wanna do that, to offer to do that, but if all else
Well,
fails-
again, we'll take a look at what I sent out, okay?
Okay,
And-
oh, okay, I'll
And
take a
I
look
think,
at it.
yeah, that can be,
Okay.
um,
I'm gonna ask this right now.
Sure.
I was reading a section on split rate, and when you talk about how it's calculated, and it talks about, aggregating the commercial and industrial amounts to calculate how much, what the rate is after you've given this exemption. What happens to personal property in all of
Which
this?
exemption, we talked about the small commercial exemption?
Yeah,
They are unaffected.
what,
They
What-
get, if it's in a single rate, if the small commercial rate is adopted with a single tax rate, the personal property would be taxed on the single tax rate.
what about if you have a split?
Split tax rate, then I would calculate the split tax rate would be for the personal property alone.
Okay, that's how you do it. I.
yeah, you change you change that
So you
levy
have to
first
do
and
s-
then shift it
That's right.
within,
You take,
the commercial and industrial
I
classes.
back out the commercial industrial, and then we come up with the tax rate for each of those independently. Of course, the commercial industrial will have the small commercial exemption built into it, and then the tax rate's calculated.
Okay, so it's really, there are 3 tax rates that you come out with.
Yes,
If you've got a split tax rate and a small commercial exemption, you have,
which I'm very much looking forward to.
oh wait, or do you have 4? You have
Yeah, the
the
residential.
residential
open space
part,
stays
you have
together.
the personal property rate
Right,
exempted.
and then the small commercial.
Oh, well, I guess it's the exempt, that rate applies to what their value is after the exemption. Okay, for those that get exempted, okay, got it. But I just couldn't figure out what happened to personal property as I was reading that in the calculation.
In that one, it's held harmless, yep.
Okay, well, they're held harmless, but they're still paying the
Yes, in a small,
shifted rate.
in a split rate scenario, they pay the commercial rate.
Right, okay. Got it. I said I've been doing this for 2 months, and all
Okay.
of a sudden I saw that and didn't understand it at all.
No, you understood it.
Now I do think about it. Well, I thought about it because I was reading what he had written here, and I'm saying, what happened to those? Okay.
Okay, so there's one new thing really in my write-up on the split rate, and Frank's provided some information on the distribution of property values in Chelmsford, commercial, industrial, personal property, and also in Billerica and over in Westford, as I recall. I broke out just the Chelmsford and Billerica commercial and industrial distributions, just to kind of get a sense to see if there was anything going on there. To tell you the truth, what I expected to see was that Chelmsford would have a bunch of relatively low value, 500,000 or less kind of properties, and Billerica was going to have a bunch of $20 million plus properties. And in fact, it actually turns out to be the reverse. Chelmsford actually has more $10 and $20 million properties than Billerica does. So I've put those 2 charts in there. I don't know really what to make of that. Maybe we don't need to make anything of it at all.
Where did you put those? Under
These are in the split rate
split rate?
at the end of it.
Okay.
Looking at the distribution of the large and small business properties. But I just wanted to bring your attention to that. One of the other things that came up, it's something that we have not discussed. I want to throw a couple of other things out there, and maybe these go under additional approaches. Just for the sake of completeness, there is an open space exemption that you can basically shift tax burden to the residential class out of open space. There must be, a handful of
Right.
towns that do that, but Chelmsford, the open space value is something like
Only a couple
0.23%.
that do it. And it's reserved for, generally, it's done with parcels that are in excess of zoning, in excess of a buildable lot, and then a tax break is given to those parcels. It's almost, any parcel that's above zoning or above an acre already gets discounted dramatically. Take a buildable lot, for instance. I value the first acre at premium, roughly $250,000. Every acre after that, I value at $12,000 per acre. And if the lot is distressed in any way, sloped, wetlands, that sort of thing, it might get a further reduction. And what this is attempting to do is establish a curve, economy of scale, recognizing that the first acre is at a premium, and then as you get into multiple acres after that, assuming it can only support one home. We're talking about a tract of land, multiple acres that can only support one home. Then we establish an economy of scale, and it seems to work pretty effectively.
Do we need to put something about it in the write-up, or can we just gloss over it because it's,
Gloss over it.
Gloss over it.
okay.
I don't,
Okay.
what is
This
this?
isn't, like, there isn't a current use tax or anything in the state, right? That's
Nope.
where, you get.
And one of the
Open
first things
space.
would have to happen is, I don't know if it's town meeting or the
It's
selectmen,
taxed at the same
Residential.
rate as residential.
would have to establish what would be an open space and begin any
Right.
number of different things. But it'd be something like I described, residual land, non-buildable lots, which once again are reduced in valuation.
Right, and it's such a small
And
value,
also, it's just like these
within
other
the town.
exemptions, in that whatever tax savings are realized for those that qualify are passed on to the rest of the residential. The commercial, industrial, personal property are held harmless in that scenario.
So you're bringing it up, was the thought that maybe we shouldn't be discounting them to that effect?
No,
and-
I'm just,
and,
I'm just wanna make sure nobody's uncomfortable with not really addressing it.
It is
in
worth
the
addressing
report.
in this,
I mean-
one of the things, when the selectmen by law review this, and what I have to present by law is information on everything we've discussed here, plus the open space. So it would be the split rate, small commercial, residential exemption, and open space discount.
So
We don't
maybe-
get into the open space
so maybe
discount
we
because it hasn't
should-
really been.
Maybe we should mention it then. All right,
But I mean, these properties they may be discounted sort of in how they're assessed, but once they're assessed, doesn't affect. I mean, the only way it could affect, the tax rates or tax, what people pay was if they were assessed differently. I mean, maybe
well,
I'm missing something.
no, you could give them a slightly lower rate, right? and-
Lower than the residential.
Lower
rate.
than the residential rate, and honestly, you probably wouldn't even notice it on your house because there's just so little of it there. But okay, so
Yeah.
for the sake of completeness for the report, I'll just write up a paragraph that says this thing exists. It's
No,
not
I
it's
think
not
you oughta-
useful
I-
for
I-
It's
Chelmsford.
immaterial to
I think
this.
it's immaterial
Yeah,
to
it
this.
is, but
Well,
comment
except if
on
they're
it.
going to be asked to vote on it as part of the classification discussion, I think we
No
should.
open space allocation was considered because of its immateriality to the issue, period.
What do they vote on relative to the open space? What the?
If they want to apply a discount to the open space relative, it's basically just like the residential, that's not the best example. The small commercial exemption is better, right? Where you're moving the tax burden within that class, right? You're taking it off of the small
Okay, but
parcels and
it's
putting it
not
onto the big
something
one.
we've always done it this way?
Every year, the selectmen vote on that issue by law.
And pretty much, we've always done it that way, is what you're saying.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
So
Right.
the only thing would be to change it, to say we don't discount it because we want to collect more taxes from it.
No, they're not discounting it now. I'm
Oh,
just not sure it's ever been put in the main
Oh,
motion.
Okay,
Put it to
Just-
a motion at a time. We do not have it, have never had it, to my
Okay.
knowledge.
Right.
There is no additional, like these other exemptions, no additional revenue to be realized. I think only Bedford at this point is a community that recognizes it.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's,
It's,
It's-
so we're just assessing them the way you've been doing them for years and years and years.
Yes.
There's no deferred revenue.
There's no
from
deferred
these
revenue.
properties.
Don't mention them. It's
Okay.
confused me tonight. Let's not put it there. Confuse everybody else.
Yeah, Frank, don't go too far. One of the other things that came out looking at the distribution of these valuations in Chelmsford. Right now, we have a $5,000 exemption for personal property, and that is, I think, from a just a record-keeping perspective, as useful as anything else. We could extend that up to 10,000. The percentage of the personal property class is quite small for valuations under $10,000. It's something like 950,000 out of 161 million.
That's right.
Right? So that is something that we might consider. Once again, I don't know if it makes a lot of sense in and of itself, but it would be one of the things that I would think about recommending if we were going to go with a split rate along with a small commercial exemption. Do you have a sense of whether that would make your life easier or not? I mean, there are a fair number of parcels in that in that category, but if you've got to keep track of them all anyway.
We do, and it's a good point. And the reason I didn't do it so much for my office as the collector's office. What the collector found he was doing in terms of dealing with defaulted businesses, they all tended to be relatively lower valued properties. So he was spending time and resources chasing these down, third-party collectors and that kind of thing. We saw that concentration at the bottom. So many other communities do this, whether it's $5,000 or $10,000. The intent of it is to eliminate those from getting a tax bill, hopefully limit the number that that don't respond to the bills. So we started out at $5,000, frankly, because we thought we could get that across the goal line at town meeting, which we did. And what we found was, even though it dropped the value somewhat, it was the number of accounts that eliminated. It went from about 1,100 to 1,200. It must have eliminated 400 accounts from getting a tax bill, while only eliminating very little money. So 10,000. I did the analysis at the time, and I could send the PowerPoint to you, Mike, that had all this information. I think we did it maybe 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'll run it by John as well, see how.
I
he
mean,
feels.
yeah, I think I think you can get rid of another 160 or so.
That's right,
at-
without
at a
necessarily
cost
getting
of
rid
less
of
than $1 million.
a lot of value.
Yeah.
Because what ends up happening, frankly, is that those tax dollars that I'm eliminating is dispersed around the entire town. So
Right.
that's one of the reasons I'm glad I went before town meeting, because that's worth getting out there.
Yeah, so I think that's, we can, I guess I'll put something quickly together about that as well, although it may already be in the exemptions write-up. But we can take a look at that.
I'll send the
next week.
PowerPoint that I did a few years ago.
Yeah.
Frank, if I could, just to clarify, my definition of personal property may be different than yours, but are we talking personal assets that are attached to a building, or are we talking just anything that's in a building?
It's taxable personal property is generally furniture and fixtures, machinery and equipment used in the conduct of business. It gets a little more nuanced than that, but essentially that's
Yeah,
it.
okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
No residential. Residential does not, unless it's a second home, which we don't have. But in seasonal communities, like the ones that also get the residential exemption,
Yeah.
they would also get hit with a a personal property that would include furniture and the things that are in a rental home.
Just so I make sure I understand, if we, right now, the exemption is 5,000. That applies to everybody, right? Not just the accounts that it wipes out, or does it, do you only receive it if your personal property valuation is less than 5,000?
That's exactly right.
Okay,
Yep.
so somebody who's got, an $18 million valuation,
they're-
they're not gonna get another 5,000 off.
No, it's just the
It-
5,000 or
once you get
less.
across that threshold.
That's right. So that's why I say it doesn't really help my office as much, because
Right.
we still do the processing, send out the forms of list, which is the business's opportunity. I'm sure Tom has seen them. The form of list gives an opportunity to fill out all the personal property. We still process it, come up with the valuations, and then that $5,000 is applied.
Okay. Okay, thanks. The last thing, and again, this is maybe a little bit beyond the scope of what we've talked about, but a couple of communities have done it recently. It is possible to do a means-tested exemption for seniors. It takes an act of the legislature to make it happen. Is that something we want to bring up? It kind of goes beyond the scope of classification.
Why would we want to bring it up?
Well, it would
Again, as a
help.
one-line item kind of thing, as additional exploration.
Maybe I'll find an article on it and refer.
I
Yeah.
Interested
think
parties
one
to
of the
that.
selectmen have said, they want to help the seniors.
Yes.
Maybe that's
Yeah,
the option to
Yeah,
help the
that's where it
seniors.
would fall under for this, it's not class, but
Yeah.
say it again, it's a proposal to,
It's a home rule
Okay,
proposal, basically, and you can do means testing, a means-tested exemption for seniors.
I think that Sudbury did that, I believe.
Sudbury and,
so whatever,
Somebody
whatever
else.
is exempt for these seniors,
I'd have to look
does
up,
it?
I don't know if there's an upper limit on the exemption,
Well,
or if it-
where does the levy that they're
Well,
not
that's a
paying
good
get
point.
covered? Does it-
If it's the one I'm thinking of, I think it's one we kind of talked about in an email, it ties into the circuit breaker. Whoever got,
Okay.
if whoever qualified for the circuit breaker would also qualify for an exemption within the town, for an amount to be determined by the selectmen.
Oh, no, that's a different one.
Different one?
Yeah, because that can be done by an active town meeting, right?
I believe so. All of these, I think, we take an
Right,
act.
so this is something else then. I'll do a
I'll have to
little bit
brush
of
up on
digging
that
And,
one.
but who
find it.
pays, where does the coverage for their section of the
Once
levy,
it-
does it get dispersed or does it come out of overlay?
It comes out of overlay, it's an exemption.
Well, that's the
One I'm describing,
yeah,
sounds
right.
like you might be talking about something else.
Yeah, which I think might get, I'll have to do a little bit more digging
I'll look
on
for it
that.
too.
Okay.
I have an article about this.
The Sudbury one? Can you tell from skimming it who pays?
Talks about what the benefit is and who qualifies. Does not appear to on
Okay.
first glance.
Okay.
Okay, the last thing that I have on my list here,
Same last thing.
I know. I'll get there eventually. It's,
Here for that?
it's something that came up during the public input session. Has anybody looked at trying to make a map of the towns with split rates?
What's it?
A
Map?
a graphic representation, towns colored. Remember, somebody wanted to know if they were,
But I
if
don't
they
see
were
what the
close
purpose
to,
is.
if they were western or eastern or close to a population center, like if there was a ring around Boston, or
In
Oh, I
terms
Or
of
did
what,
we-
in terms of what communities,
whether they had a split rate or not, what their CIP share was, or did we decide that everyone is so
Everyone's diff-
individual that?
yeah, I
that
don't think there's
we
no
don't-
correlation. That's a wasted,
Okay,
That'll be a point of interest, but
Yeah, that's about it.
that's about it.
only if you can,
I like
only
maps.
if you
I
can
I
make
like
them.
maps, I'd like
Can't
to
use
look at it, but
Yeah, I like to look at them, but
Yeah,
I'm
I
not, that would be a real trick to put it together. Okay,
Yeah, I was looking at, this
What's the
must have
last thing
come from
now?
John, split rate stories and what happens when communities adopt.
that was the last thing under new business. The only thing under old business is the upcoming meetings. We do still have John Power on the schedule to come, talk to us on Tuesday next week.
John Power, in 25 words or less,
Is the owner of 300 Apollo Drive?
150.
150.
Among other buildings, yes.
And why is he coming?
To talk to
It was
us.
No, I meant-
suggested,
We're so far into this, and we're gonna listen to somebody now
We're
put some
gonna,
more
we're giving,
input?
him- yep, we're gonna give him a chance. It was the first time he could be here.
right.
Okay.
I'm happy to give him 20 minutes or 30 minutes, and we'll see
Okay.
what kind of discussion happens. The only other thing is gonna be trying to vote on the report.
So
Right?
that's are we meeting next Thursday, the following Thursday?
Well,
27th,
what do you guys think?
yeah.
I won't be here on Thursday.
I can be here. My schedule is cleared up for Thursday nights.
I've already changed my schedule to accommodate, so,
Okay, I'll talk to Colleen about finding a room.
but we have to get, yeah, you can find a room and you gotta get the.
I'm just not sure how much it gains us, to tell you the truth.
Because you think we're gonna have this all done and agreed to next meeting?
That's.
But are we
that's
gonna
what
be
I-
any better 48 hours later?
We might.
Okay, all right, I'll talk to Colleen about getting a place then.
And then after that, we're going to the first?
Well, the first is the
What's
is the
looking-
Board of Selectmen meeting.
Do you think we need to be here on the second?
Not
Do you
if
think
we-
we're gonna
no,
be
I-
done?
Well, I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about is,
Okay.
can we really do a final presentation to the selectmen on October 1st? I think about the only wiggle room I see there would be to do a presentation to them and ask for feedback and then give them the final presentation, just hand it off to them. A week or
Written
two later,
report.
a written report. But I think for all effective purposes, we need the presentation that we do for them on October 1st needs to summarize our work.
I mean, they may ask for additional information.
Well, that's the thing, if we wanna hold that possibility open, if that's the case, then maybe we don't need to meet Thursday.
I
It
can't
depends
wait
on
to
what you
see
think
it.
is gonna happen between
I-
Tuesday and Thursday.
I-
If it's just cleaning up borders, then,
I think the report should be presented in its finality. I don't think there should be a do-over after.
Okay.
I suggest you look for a room, you post an agenda, because that has to be
Yeah.
done before Tuesday, and we can always cancel a meeting on Tuesday if we decide we don't need the Thursday meeting.
Right.
If we start taking input from the selectmen to change the report, then the report becomes biased, in my opinion.
Yeah,
I
well, okay.
could be speaking out of turn, but
no, you know what, that's
Good
actually
point.
not a bad point.
we're the ones writing the report, not them.
Are we ready?
No, we're almost there. Public input, press questions. Now we're there.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
All right.
Aye. Thank you very much. We'll see you next Tuesday.
I know.